priest in the Holy Apostolic Catholic Assyrian Church of the East and a proud Arizonan. Father Andrew faithfully serves Arizona's thriving Assyrian American community. Thousands of strong families preserving one of the world's oldest Christian faiths and their ancient Mesopotamian heritage. Like so many who came to America seeking freedom, they've brought deep faith, tight-knit families, entrepreneurial drive, and true patriotism to our state. Through their churches and community work, they strengthen Arizona every day. I'm proud to thank Father Aziz for his dedicated service. Arizona is stronger because of leaders like him and the vibrant Assyrian American community he serves. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The chair will entertain up to 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Thank you so much.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize an extraordinary educator, mentor, and leader who has made a lasting impact at Magnolia Junior High School as assistant principal, Mr. Jason Hawkins. A proud alumnus of Side Creek High School, Texas A&M, and Lamar University, Jason began his teaching career with Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District, rising to assistant principal in 2011. After years of faithfully serving students and staff there, he stepped into the role as assistant principal at Magnolia Junior High in 2018, where his impact has continued to grow. In a world where strong role models matter more than ever, Jason represents the very best of public education. His leadership reminds us that the true measure of an educator is not only found in policy and test scores, but in the lives they influence, the confidence they build, and the example they set for future generations. Please join me in recognizing an exceptional assistant principal, educator, mentor, husband to Christina, father to Kayla and Cody, and a friend to everyone, Mr. Jason Hawkins. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address an issue that is hitting families in every corner of our country, the unyielding rise of inflation. This month, the Consumer Price Index climbed to 3.8%, and that number isn't just a statistic. It shows up every time you fill your gas tank, check out at the grocery store, or open your utility bill. The pressure on your paycheck is real, and it is growing. Hardworking people are stretching every dollar, but instead of tackling this affordability crisis head-on, my colleagues here in the House continue to bring forward legislation that does nothing to lower costs. We're continually obsessed with culture war, emotional issues, choosing personal political gain over good governance, ignoring the prevailing crisis that is facing our country. It's time to give Americans the relief they deserve and restore affordability in everyday life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans have courageously served America to protect freedoms we enjoy. They deserve the respect of American families and must never be forgotten. This week, House Republicans will vote on multiple bills to protect the constitutional rights of veterans and expand access to benefits they have earned through service. House Republicans believe that veterans deserve better, care they can access, veterans benefits delivered on time, a Veterans Administration that works for veterans, real support for mental health, housing, and education and employment. Memorial Day on Monday is a solemn day of remembrance for the Americans who have given their lives in service for our country, liberating dozens of countries from socialism and communism. In conclusion, God bless our troops as the global war on terrorism continues. Trump is reinstituting peace through strength, revealing war criminal Putin lies, insulting Trump and mocking Trump as the Chinese Communist Party trains Putin troops to murder Ukrainian civilians, where Ukrainian parents provide whistles at night to children to be heard as Putin attacks civilian apartment buildings. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, far too many Vietnam service members return home without the honor and recognition their sacrifice deserved. As Memorial Day nears, we remember brave service members from Eastern North Carolina who made the ultimate sacrifice, such as Lieutenant Eric Parker Brights of Rocky Mount, a Navy pilot flying dangerous combat missions over Vietnam. On June the 4th, 1968, went down after his F-4 Phantom II was struck by enemy fire. Army Sergeant Willie Farmer Jr. of Pine Tops was only 21 years old when his life was tragically cut short after being struck by fragments from a downed helicopter rotor blade during combat operations on September 29, 1967. The stories of Lieutenant Brice and Sergeant Farmer reflect enormous sacrifice. We must always honor and remember our nation's heroes. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maryland seek recognition?
Revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to supporting Congressman DeLuzio and Nell's bipartisan Railroad Retirement Fairness Act. This legislation eliminates outdated provisions of federal law that unfairly reduces railroad retirement payments for certain retirees and spouses who continue to work in non-railroad jobs after retirement. This is really important because we shouldn't be penalizing rail workers who choose to or sometimes have to continue working after retirement. Mr. Speaker, this is also a deeply personal issue for me. My father was a proud member of BLET Local 71 out of Philadelphia and drove trains for SEPTA for decades. He provided for our family, working mostly nights and weekends, and now relies on that hard-earned railroad retirement. I know firsthand the long hours and grit these jobs take on both railroad workers and their families, which is why I support this legislation to level the playing field and ensure hardworking rail workers keep their rightfully earned retirement benefits. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
Hi, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today during Mental Health Awareness Month to talk about something that impacts every family in this country. Whether it's struggling ourselves or someone we know, all of us have been touched by mental health challenges. And far too often, people don't have access to the critical care that they need. For me, it was my brother, Justin. After years of struggling and falling through the cracks, we lost him to suicide in 2008. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him. Justin was one of the smartest people I've known. He was passionate and avid reader, and he was working to become a history teacher. He had recently been married and had his entire life ahead of him. Through all of the moments of our lives, big and small, our family grieves that he is not with us today. The most important thing we can do to reduce the stigma is to tell our stories. And that's why I'm here telling mine. Because to the individuals and the families who are struggling in this country, I want you to know that you're not alone. And there are so many of us here in Congress who are not going to stop fighting for you. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Families across the country are struggling to afford groceries. The cost of eggs, milk, bread, baby formula, and fresh produce keeps rising while giant grocery chains and corporate executives rake in record profits. And now some of the grocery stores are now using surveillance technology and digital labels to squeeze even more money out of working people. It is shameful that corporations would raise prices on products that they know families need to survive. For me, this is corporate greed, plain and simple. No parent, not one individual, should be able to walk in a grocery store wondering if they can afford to feed their families because an algorithm or private data that the grocery chains got decided, well, we can charge them more. That's why I introduced the Stop Price Gouging in Grocery Stores Act to crack down on these crooked pricing practices and protect consumers from corporate abuse. Not one person that goes into groceries should worry about their private information being used to jack up their prices. We all deserve fair prices, transparency, and dignity, not exploitation at the grocery store. I'm calling on all of my colleagues to please support me on the Stop Price Gouging in Grocery Stores Act. I yield.
Pursuant to Clause 4 of Rule 1, the following enrolled bill was signed by the Speaker on Wednesday, May 20th, 2026.
Senate 4530, to amend Chapters 83 and 84 of Title V United States Code to authorize an increase of the retirement age for members of the Capitol Police.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bose, seek recognition?
Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, I call up H.R. 1041 as amended and ask for its immediate consideration of the House.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 112, H.R. 1041. A bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to prohibit the Secretary of Veterans Affairs from transmitting certain information to the Department of Justice for use by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Veterans Affairs printed in the bill is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs or their respective designees. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bose, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material in the record on H.R. 1041 as amended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of my bill, H.R. 1041, as amended, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. The choice before the House today is clear. Whether those who defended our freedom deserve the same constitutional protection as non-veterans. This past February, President Trump and Secretary Collins answered that question with a resounding yes. VA overturned a long-standing policy of automatically reporting veterans and beneficiaries to the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or also called NICS, simply because they needed help managing their VA benefits. VA reported them not because they committed a crime or because a judge or a medical professional determined they were a danger to themselves or others. VA reported them to NICS simply because they needed help managing their benefits. That was the policy for over 3 decades. Speaker, I've been working on this issue for 10 years. And because I know that this interpretation of the law is wrong. That is why I have long championed this bill, as well as my bipartisan provision in the yearly VA appropriation bill to prohibit VA's fiduciary program from reporting veterans' names to NICS. This is a bill about due process. And most importantly, it's about protecting our veterans' Second Amendment rights. It is time we put a permanent end to the practice of treating our veterans' Second Amendment rights as an option and pass H.R. 1041. This bill would codify the policy rider that was included in the Milcon appropriation bill that passed the House last week. As a veteran and as a sportsman, I believe it is a gross violation of due process to say that a veteran with a fiduciary should be treated as a second-class citizen. Our veterans raise their right hand to defend the constitutional rights of American citizens. I know because I was one of them, and I took that responsibility seriously. Yet, when the question came before our committee on whether it would defend their rights, Ranking Member Takano and our colleagues on the other side of the aisle voted no. Mr. Speaker, it is an unfortunate fact that some members in this chamber plan to defend this discriminatory practice. A civilian generally cannot lose their Second Amendment rights without involvement from a judge. But veterans did for 3 decades, and Democrats would prefer they continue to. A veteran goes to the VA to ask for help, and the VA bureaucracy answers yes, but only in exchange for your Second Amendment rights. Speaker, that is not due process. This is an anti-gun, anti-veteran agenda. If a veteran poses a legitimate threat to themselves or others, judges already have legal tools available to them. Let me say that again. Judges already have legal tools available to them. A veteran should receive the same rights as every other American. There is also something else I want to raise. The false assumption that disabled veterans are dangerous, and the harmful assumption that the capacity to manage your finances has any bearing on how dangerous or that you are dangerous as well. Those sort of cartoon-like simplifications cause those with disabilities to face extra hurdles when exercising their rights. It is unacceptable. And as a veteran, I'm not going to stand for it anymore. There is no evidence that these veterans are more dangerous to themselves or others simply because they need help managing their benefits. Holding veterans to the evidenceless standard is outrageous. And frankly, it paints the veterans' mental health issues in a way that should concern everyone. Over 200,000 veterans were reported to the NICS list under this practice. Let me say it again, 200,000 veterans. Secretary Collins and President Trump worked with DOJ to change that, wiping the list clean. And I want to be clear, no person, veteran or otherwise, reported to the NICS by a state, judge, law enforcement agency, or other reporting bodies for any other reason was removed. At committee markup, Democrats also offered an amendment after amending designed to delay and weaken this bill. They wanted more study. Chairman, I'm tired after 10 years of delays. Democrats want a system where veterans are presumed guilty, a system where veterans are forced to prove their innocence. In America, constitutional rights are God-granted rights. Veterans should never have to choose between assistance and preserving their constitutional rights. And veterans with disabilities should not be discriminated against. This Congress has a responsibility to protect veterans' rights just as fiercely as they protect any other American's rights. This Memorial Day, let us not just remember those veterans who made the ultimate sacrifice. Let us also remember the freedoms and the people who they sacrificed it for. I urge all members to support H.R. 1041 as amended. And Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to this bill and urge my colleagues to vote against it as well. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and it also happens to be Military Appreciation Month. And we are also here a few days before Memorial Day, when we honor those who gave all to defend our country. So, the cruel irony of the majority choosing to consider this bill now is not lost on me. They are here once again putting politics above policy, Only this time, Republicans are playing political games with the lives of veterans. It goes without saying that there is a mental health crisis in this country. Americans of all stripes lack access to the resources necessary to properly care for their mental health or fail to fully realize them, and they suffer because of this crisis. Veterans are sadly no exception and may face additional challenges due to service-connected mental health conditions. Many veterans can access mental health care through VA, but those not connected to VA care may face additional challenges seeking resources and support. Unfortunately, because of cheap, easy access to firearms in this country, our nation's mental health crisis is one of the many contributors to the epidemic of suicide and gun violence in America. Again, veterans are not immune to that. And where those two issues converge, veterans and their communities suffer the consequences. Let me just cite a few examples. Lewiston, Maine, Thousand Oaks, California, Sutherland Springs and Fort Hood, Texas, New Orleans, Louisiana, Jasper, Georgia, and countless others. And the absolute tragedy of veteran suicide remains persistent. Despite our best efforts, the rate of veteran suicide has not declined as far and as fast as we would like it to. More than 6,500 veterans die by suicide each year, and more than 70% of those suicides are deaths by firearms. In fact, veterans are 3 times more likely to die by suicide using a firearm than their non-veteran peers. So why, knowing all of that, do we find ourselves debating a bill today that will only lead to more firearms in the hands of the most vulnerable veterans in VA care? The answer is pure and simple: politics. This bill is not about the Second Amendment. It is about Republicans invoking their favorite political shield whenever they need to distract from their failure to govern. They have brought versions of this bill to the floor, and in committee, they've brought it up again and again for nearly a decade, and usually when they want an election year fight, not a serious veterans policy debate. And veterans should know exactly what's happening here. The majority is using the Second Amendment as branding for a bill that has nothing to do with veterans losing rights for seeking care. That is not happening. What is happening is that Republicans are stoking fear, feeding stigma, and using vulnerable veterans as props in a political fight. More specifically, Republicans desire to invoke the Second Sacred Amendment. They desire to invoke the sacred Second Amendment and use the issue of access to firearms for political gain, and that's what's driving this conversation. They would do so by endangering veterans' lives. That they would do so by endangering veterans' lives is disgusting to me, and it should be to them as well. What we'll hear from Republicans is that fear of having their Second Amendment rights encroached upon leads to a reluctance of veterans to seek mental health care. That is true. But that very fear is being stoked by the stage they have set for today's debate. The constant refrain from Republicans that VA will take your guns away if you seek help, that is what is fueling the harmful stigma. Under no circumstances does seeking mental health care at VA lead to a loss of rights or firearms. And if the Republicans were interested in the truth, they would acknowledge that. We will hear from the majority, and we have heard from them already, that veterans' due process rights are being violated, that veterans are having their rights stripped away unconstitutionally by bureaucrats at VA. Again, not true and false on many fronts. There is robust due process built into VA systems that passes constitutional muster. We are going to hear from Republicans that VA's decision to assign someone a fiduciary and subsequently add their name to the NICS list is based on whether someone can balance their checkbook or whether they can manage their benefits. Again, another blatant falsehood. VA's decisions are based on a diagnosis of severe mental illness or injury that prevents a beneficiary from managing their own affairs. Let me say that again. VA's decisions on a diagnosis of severe mental illness or injury that prevents a beneficiary from managing their own affairs. It is documented in medical records by a clinician, not just some, what they would call a bureaucrat. It is documented in medical records by a clinician and interpreted by someone trained in reading those medical records, and at no point is anyone just given a mere math test. Mr. Speaker, at times I feel like we're screaming into the void regarding gun violence. How many more preventable deaths and injuries will we tolerate? How many veterans will we let languish in a spiral that leads to it? When will we stop political posturing and start making meaningful change to actually help veterans? This bill is certainly not accomplishing that task. Unfortunately, my counterparts have lost sight of the truth at the heart of this issue. And what is at the heart of this issue? It's the veterans' health and safety. The majority wants veterans to believe that this debate is about protecting constitutional rights. It is not. It is about recycling a decade-old talking point, stoking fear about VA care, and hiding behind the Second Amendment because they do not have a serious governing agenda. So today we are debating this bill, and I want you to remember that the rhetoric of the majority is not based on the reality of the situation, but rather it is based on their desire to use veterans as pawns in their election year political games. I reserve the balance of my time, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a veteran, I find this argument offensive, that veterans and fiduciaries with fiduciaries are dangerous. This is simply not true. There is no evidence provided that veterans with fiduciaries are any more violent, suicidal, or dangerous than non-veterans. Yet Democrats continue to push the idea that veterans who need help managing their finances should be treated though they were presumed dangerous. Now, he can say that that's not the case, but there was over 200,000 people that would argue different. Incompetence in financial ability is not and should not be something that should take away your Second Amendment right. Yes, veterans struggle with suicide and mental health greater than the rest of the population. Yes, those financial hardships often face and bring them negative thoughts. But the problem facing the veterans are separate and distinct. They deserve to be treated as such. And that's why we have a VA that spans everything from health care to benefits. If someone is truly a danger to themselves or others, they are medically and legally, there are medical and legal professionals who can stand by and address these issues, just like it is for those people who are non-veterans. House Resolution 1041 does not change that fact. It simply dispels harmful stereotypes. And with that, I would like to yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin who himself has been a veteran that has served beside veterans, served beside his combat brothers and sisters, and knows what veterans face. My good friend, Representative Van Orten.
For how long?
For 2 minutes.
Gentleman's
For
recognized
3
for-
minutes. Give him 3 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this bill. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right for the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the entire text of the Second Amendment. And I would argue that this should apply to those of us who literally bore arms to protect the freedoms of our fellow Americans. It's critically important. If a veteran who's incapable of balancing his checkbook has his right to bear arms removed, I would argue that this entire body could not legally carry arms because we're incapable of balancing a checkbook. And that's been proven over decades. So I implore the minority to look at veterans for who we are. We are patriotic, loving Americans, but this supersedes the Second Amendment. 97% of all referrals to the NICS database come from the VA. 97%. 60% of veterans that commit suicide have not been connected to the VA, and a significant reason that our veterans don't go to the VA is because they're concerned that they're going to lose their Second Amendment rights. With the passage of Matthew Burns, 22 of my friends have committed suicide. So I take this very seriously, and I commend Mr. Takano for having the 988 Veteran Suicide Crisis Line behind him. I thank you for that, sir, and I know that my colleague does not want our veterans to commit suicide. But this is how they're going to do it, because my fellow veterans refuse to go to the VA because they refuse to give up their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. So again, I implore my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to strongly support this bill, as I do, and with that, I yield.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, let me address this issue of who is actually in the fiduciary program. Let's talk a moment about the population that this bill is intended to cover, those who are actually in the fiduciary program. These are veterans with severe illnesses like schizophrenia, significant traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, bipolar disorder, and dementia. These are people who meet the level of injury or illness criteria such that they cannot manage their personal affairs, not just their checkbook. I've heard this argument over and over again by the majority. People are being denied, veterans are being denied access to firearms because they can't balance their checkbook. No. You can't, this is not to be reduced to that talking point. We should be looking to these veterans with care and compassion. We should look at how to better serve their needs regarding access to consistent care and treatment. All these disorders are associated with elevated risk of dangerousness to self and others, suicide in particular, especially when combined with a host of other factors that are actually concentrated in the veterans population. Moreover, we also know empirically that veterans who are found to have poor financial management abilities are also 2 times as more likely to have substance abuse disorders, suicidal ideation, or engage in violent behavior and be in the justice system. So drawing a distinction between those who simply cannot balance their checkbook and those who are more explicitly dangerous to themselves or others is not warranted, and in fact could cause more veterans to slip through the cracks. It is important to acknowledge that there are significant data gaps that exist related to the population of beneficiaries in the fiduciary program. I, for one, would like to know more about the veterans that are in the fiduciary program. This bill addresses none of those data gaps, which is one of its many flaws. Instead of seeking to understand who is in this population, the majority rejects any attempt to know more about them. The majority suggests that there are veterans on the fiduciary list who don't have the opportunity to get off that list, that there is a lack of a robust appeals process. And he cites 200,000 veterans being named in the NICS list because they're assigned a fiduciary, and cites that there's only maybe a couple of folks that have ever appealed, and cites that as the failure of the appeals process, but maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's not really what veterans want to do who are on this list. I'd like to know that for sure, and we could study that, but the majority has rejected all attempts. There is very limited information publicly available about the population of veterans deemed to be financially incompetent who have historically been reported to the NICS list, and whether they, on average, have elevated rates of suicidality or violence. No data on the desire beneficiaries in the fiduciary program to purchase or own firearms. We don't even know if people on this list actually want to own firearms. No data on why beneficiaries are failing to utilize the due process afforded to them in the system already. No data on if fear or losing the Second Amendment rights is a major impediment to seeking help or other factors, or if other factors are more important. In other words, the claim that fear of losing the Second Amendment rights is a major impediment to seeking help, that is a claim being made that has not been borne out by any sort of research or study. We also don't know about the long-term mental health outcomes of those in the fiduciary program. Democrats in the past have offered amendments to address all of these data gaps, and they were rejected universally by the majority because, again, this is not about policy making to them. This is not about really trying to understand what we can do to help veterans. What Republicans have put forth here today is a philosophical debate about the absoluteness of the Second Amendment. And they have made this argument in the absence of data to push legislation without safeguards that will have real-life consequences. Now, at this moment, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend and ranking member of the Subcommittee for Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies on the Appropriations Subcommittee, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the great state of Florida.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend, Ranking Member Tucano, for his leadership on the committee, and I know he feels just as strongly as I do on this issue, and that's why I must rise in opposition to this bill today. Every day, 17 veterans die by suicide, and 13 of them use a firearm to take their life. That number is simply unacceptable to me, and as I know it is to all of my colleagues. But I'm deeply concerned that with this bill, we're about to make it worse. The current law was written to help protect veterans. A key moment is when their doctor and care team deem that they're not able to manage their own life and are deemed to be mentally incapacitated. At that point, the law is designed to prevent them from owning a gun and potentially harming themselves. The VA should be able to refer veterans to NICS who are at the most risk for the purpose of saving lives, but this legislation will permanently tie the VA's hands. As the ranking member of the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Subcommittee, I've opposed this legislation every time it's been attached to our bill in the name of protecting veterans. When I was in the Rules Committee last week and on the floor debating the Milcon VA bill, this provision was raised multiple times. But, Mr. Speaker, I heard something different this year. There are some core agreements. There's a glimmer of hope. And we all agree that we have a major issue with getting help to our veterans and keeping them safe. And while we disagree about this legislation, I do think that there is a path forward to a bipartisan compromise, a compromise that could allow the VA to do the work that we need to save lives, the work that we directed them to do, and also that respects the choices of some of our veterans. In the meantime, I must urge my colleagues to vote no on this legislation that is attempting to use a sledgehammer where a scalpel can do the job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we should go ahead and listen to what was actually said whenever we said that, that they actually were having some mental problems and the issue of where the ranking member actually said that we only take it away and then they have an appeals process. And that appeals process is a great appeals process. 240,000 veterans have had their rights taken away, and through the appeals process, less than 800 got it back. Less than 800. He also said that some of them might not want to have their Second Amendment rights. There's nothing in our Constitution that forces you to use your Second Amendment right. There's nothing. Speaker, the Constitution, constitutional rights do not become less important simply because ignoring them is convenient. In fact, moments like these are when the Constitution protection matters the most. My colleagues say we should respond with rooted science or more studies. That's what they want, more studies. A peer review study is not standing for the rights granted to every American citizen of our nation, and who more should keep their rights than the people who stood up and fought for it? That, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 2.5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Representative Clyde.
Gentleman's recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Boston. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in very strong support of H.R. 1041, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. This bill would restore Second Amendment rights to the veterans who valiantly served our nation, but whose constitutional right to bear arms has been stripped away by unelected bureaucrats. Federal law enacted in 1968 prohibits individuals who have been adjudicated as a mental defective, and the key word is adjudicated, from possessing or acquiring firearms. This restriction is enforced primarily through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. At the same time, the Department of Veteran Affairs allows service-disabled veterans to receive their hard-earned benefits through a fiduciary when the VA determines they are unable to manage their own finances. However, this determination is often made by VA officials who may lack the adequate mental health training. When the VA makes such a determination, the veteran is automatically reported to NICS as a mental defective, and there is no actual adjudication, resulting in the loss of their Second Amendment rights. This happens without any judicial finding that the veteran poses a danger to themselves or others. In other words, service-disabled veterans who simply need assistance with financial matters can be stripped of their constitutional rights not by a judge, but by an unelected bureaucrat. These veterans are faced with an unacceptable choice: either receive the benefits they've rightly earned and risk their Second Amendment rights, or retain their constitutional rights and risk their veterans' benefits. This is a shameful and unjust dilemma, particularly for those who risk their lives in defense of our freedoms. As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I'm proud to say that Congress took an important first step toward addressing this injustice through the annual appropriations process. The FY24 enacted Consolidated Appropriations Act and subsequently enacted APROPS bills have included language directing the VA to cease this practice. And I am pleased to report that earlier this year, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Doug Collins confirmed the VA has complied with the current law and will no longer report veterans to NICS solely because of their need for a fiduciary. That is a real meaningful victory for our veterans and a testament to what this body can accomplish when we stand up for those who served in our military. But that progress is only temporary and will not remain unless we pass the bill before us today to make it permanent. I urge all my colleagues to support this vital bill that builds on that appropriations victory and ensures these protections are permanently codified so that no future administration can reverse course and once again use a veteran's need for financial assistance as grounds to unilaterally revoke their God-given Second Amendment rights. Thank you, and I yield back.
Reserve. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I want to try to bring us back down to earth and dispel the rumors that those on the other side of the aisle can't help themselves but to spread. We have heard that H.R. 1041 is a matter of restoring veterans' due process rights, that it's a matter of veterans losing their guns if they need a little help with their finances, that veterans are stripped of their right to bear arms for life by unelected VA bureaucrats. None of this is true. Veterans are not having their weapons taken away if they utilize VA mental health care. Under no circumstances VA traipsing around the country confiscating firearms. This is a story that needs to stop being told, and I would encourage my colleagues to stop intentionally spreading misinformation. The Veterans Health Administration, where veterans would be receiving care, has absolutely no role in this process and absolutely no communication with the Department of Justice or the NICS list. Veterans can and should go to VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, the VA medical centers for care without fear. Stop spreading the false fear or the false basis for fear. Start telling the truth. The truth is, there is robust due process present in this program. A veteran can appeal the assignment of a fiduciary and their subsequent reporting to NICS both before and after the fact, including in federal court. I will note, though, that VA data indicates that not many people choose to appeal this decision, not because it is too difficult, but because it is a pathway that veterans simply are not choosing or simply don't desire. But again, we're talking about veterans and other beneficiaries who have been injured or made ill in such a way that they cannot make decisions for themselves. And to be clear, this is not something VA launches into without regard. Veterans in this program have gone through a rigorous medically based process to determine their needs for a fiduciary. The decision is not some flippant choice to take away weapons by unelected bureaucrats over a math test, as we often hear. An assignment of a fiduciary is done after highly specific criteria are met, and only then, when those criteria are met, does a veteran's name get forwarded to the next database. But the majority asks, why are we treating our veterans like criminals? Why are we assuming guilt and barring them from obtaining weapons? This is a fantastic rhetorical, let me just say it again. This is a fantastic rhetorical flourish. It is also fantastical. Veterans are not being treated like criminals. They're being handled in a manner that is commensurate with their medical status, as determined by a medical provider in order to protect them and those around them from potential harm. We have to stop spreading falsehoods and be honest with our veterans. It is inappropriate, full stop. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend and passionate advocate for gun safety in America, Representative Lucy McBath from the great state of Georgia.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. I really appreciate you allowing me to share some insight today. Mr. Speaker, as an American and someone coming from a military family, my father was a dentist in the Army Dental Corps, and I still have 3 members of my family today that are currently serving in the military forces. I can tell you that our veterans have given so much of themselves to this country, and we owe them our protection. The Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act fails that duty. It does not protect them, and it puts them in danger. The facts are clear. Veterans are far more likely to die by firearm suicide than the average American. That risk is even higher for veterans assigned a fiduciary when they can no longer manage their own affairs. That is the group that this bill targets. Nearly 100,000 of them would be removed from the background check system with no thought for their safety or the families who love and care for them. Without red flag laws in most states and with loosened gun rules and regulations that are flooding our communities, veterans and their families are the ones that are paying the price. And I'll tell you what that price looks like. Ben Miller served his country coming home not only as a combat vet, but as a different man. He was 30 pounds lighter, unable to eat and unable to cope with what he had experienced and seen in war. He was getting help at the VA, but his family could see that he was in crisis. His sister and his brother, they drove from gun store to gun store, showing his photo, begging strangers not to sell him a gun. But that wasn't enough. Ben died by suicide. He used a gun that he bought himself at a local store. There are thousands more stories like Ben's, and ones that don't even get talked about in the news. And we owe our veterans more than this. It is not about taking away their Second Amendment rights. If they're law-abiding gun owners and hunters and gun enthusiasts and sportsmen, it's not about taking their guns away. But it is about making sure that they are protected against harm against themselves or others in their families and communities. I will vote no on this egregious bill. And I urge my colleagues to do the same. If you really care about our veterans, do what's right for them. Do what's right for their safety and their protection. And I yield back.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Representative Hageman.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 1041, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act, because I do, in fact, care about our veterans. For 3 decades, the Department of Veterans Affairs has abided by the misguided policy that a veteran's fiduciary status alone, absent any judicial order, is grounds to report such a veteran to the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System. This policy is wrong and not only infringes on the Second Amendment rights of our veterans, but also strips them of their due process protections, which are afforded to every other American citizen. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Collins have taken the lead by halting this policy, and it is now up to Congress to ensure this kind of abuse is never witnessed again. Mr. Speaker, our courageous veterans have made incredible sacrifices to safeguard both our country and its founding freedoms and principles that we cherish every single day. With over 40,000 veterans across Wyoming, ensuring that we're permanently restoring the Second Amendment rights for each of them is of paramount importance to me, and that is precisely what this bill will do. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill, and I want to thank Chairman Bost and the House Veterans Affairs Committee for their tireless leadership on this critical issue. I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 1041, and I yield back.
Reserve. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield 4 minutes to my good friend and fellow committee member, Dr. Kelly Morrison from the great state of Minnesota.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 1041, legislation that would prevent VA from keeping firearms out of the hands of some of the most vulnerable veterans in the VA system. As a physician and the wife of an Army combat veteran, I care deeply about making sure our veterans receive the care we owe them for their service. Like my colleagues, I'm heartbroken and appalled by the scale of veteran suicide in our country, and I remain committed to working with my colleagues to end this epidemic. Unfortunately, the bill before us today is a step in the wrong direction. VA's decision to assign a fiduciary to a beneficiary is made based on medical evidence, and there already exist multiple avenues for beneficiaries to appeal VA's decision. In addition, we know that many of these veterans suffer from severe mental illness or impairment that may face an increased risk of death by suicide. According to the National Alliance of Mental Illness, 46% of people who die by suicide suffered from a known mental health condition. In addition, a recent VA estimate suggested that veterans are 57% more likely to die by suicide than non-veterans. All told, we lose more than 17 veterans per day to suicide, 13 of them using a firearm, which is completely unacceptable. While mental illness and impairment do not lead to suicide on their own, we must be cognizant of veterans who might be at greater risk than the general population. As public health and suicide prevention experts will tell us, putting time and distance between a firearm and a person experiencing a mental health crisis is essential to preventing a successful suicide attempt. Preventing VA from reporting to the NICS background check system risks putting more firearms in the hands of a population of veterans who are already at an increased risk of death by suicide. When we considered this legislation in the Veterans Affairs Committee, I offered an amendment that would have created a carve-out for veterans suffering from severe conditions, such as schizophrenia, dementia, Alzheimer's, and other mental conditions with psychotic features. Unfortunately, the bill my Republican colleagues decided to bring to the floor today fails to include even the most basic safeguards for veterans suffering from these severe impairments. While there is no silver bullet that will eradicate veteran suicide, making it easier for veterans suffering from severe mental illness or impairment to obtain a gun is not the answer. H.R. 1041 creates serious risks for a group of veterans who are already in a vulnerable position, and I cannot support it. Instead of considering this partisan legislation that puts more veterans at risk, we should be working together to advance solutions that will help us fight veteran suicide, like improving access to timely mental health care, protecting crisis intervention resources such as the Veterans Crisis Line, and ensuring VA has the resources and staffing it needs to give our veterans the outstanding care they deserve. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this legislation. For this reason, at the appropriate time, I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with an important amendment to this bill. My amendment would ensure this legislation does not take effect until the VA Secretary certifies that it will not lead to an increase in veteran suicide using a firearm. If my Republican colleagues are so confident that this legislation won't risk increasing the rate of veteran suicide, this should be an easy measure for them to support. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the text of this amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for the motion to recommit, and I yield back.
Lady yields back.
I reserve, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want you to listen to what the previous speaker just said. She explained that if someone has a mental health condition or someone has these other concerns, and that she would offer an amendment to that. But let me explain to you that if we grant them their constitutional rights, they already have that ability. They already have that ability in the fact that their constitutional rights would be treated exactly the same as a person that does not serve in the military and does not go to the VA. Someone could see that if they had a problem, and then they could take and raise that before a judge, not before a bureaucrat. Let me explain this again. This is not about gun rights. This is not about about dealing with our veterans that might commit suicide or any other one that might commit suicide. This is about the constitutional right of a veteran who has fought for those rights, that a bureaucrat has the power to take away their ability to have that Second Amendment, which is in the Constitution. Now, you might not agree with that Second Amendment, and that's been a debate here several times. But now, to continue to carry on and use this law to take away those people who fought for your rights? How ridiculous is that? And how ridiculous is it going to be to go back to Memorial Day and tell your veterans, I was there for you. We took away your rights. Well, I think that's ridiculous. Now, at this time, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from North Carolina, 2.5 minutes, Congressman Edwards.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bost. I appreciate the chance to speak on this bill, and I certainly appreciate your leadership on this important matter. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 1041, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. This bill is about basic fairness and restoring a standard that respects both our veterans and the Constitution. Under current practice, a veteran who simply needs to help manage their VA benefits can be reported to the FBI's background check system and lose their Second Amendment rights without ever appearing before a judge. That is an extraordinary outcome for something as routine as appointing a fiduciary. No other American loses a constitutional right because of an administrative decision about their finances, and our veterans should not be that exception. H.R. 1041 corrects that imbalance. It restores the principle that should have guided this process from the beginning. Only a court of law can determine whether someone poses a danger to themselves or others. That is the due process standard our system is built on, and it's the only standard appropriate when a constitutional right is at stake. It safeguards both due process and the constitutional freedoms our veterans fought to defend. By reaffirming that these determinations must be made through proper legal channels, the bill ensures veterans are treated with the same fairness and dignity as every other American. It also brings clarity and consistency to a process that has too often been confusing, unevenly applied, and out of step with the protections guaranteed to all citizens. Our veterans stood in defense of the Constitution, and they deserve nothing less than its full protection in return. H.R. 1041 honors that commitment. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois yields. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield 2 minutes to Representative Crank from Colorado.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and I thank the distinguished chairman for yielding to me. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. I'm proud to represent El Paso County and the 100,000 veterans and active duty service members who live there. These heroes committed their lives in service to the nation in protection of our Constitution. They served with the promise that when their military career ended, the VA would be there to provide the benefits they earned and to advocate for their best interests. Unfortunately, as we all know, too often the VA fails in this mission. For 30 years, veterans have had their Second Amendment rights stripped by the VA simply for the crime of receiving help managing their benefits. For the past 3 decades, if the VA assigned a veteran a fiduciary, a benefit they've rightfully earned, they would automatically report that veteran to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System as a prohibited person. This unconstitutional practice blacklisted over 250,000 veterans from the right to purchase or possess a firearm. This malicious VA rule treats our veterans as second-class citizens and deters our heroes from seeking the care they earned in service to their nation out of fear their Second Amendment rights will be taken away. And what would my colleagues on the other side, who so flippantly say veterans can be denied their Second Amendment rights, what would they say if we were somehow denying their First Amendment rights, their right to free speech, their right to religion, their right to peaceably assemble? They wouldn't stand for it. They'll only stand for it but because it denies a right that they disagree with. That's not what the Constitution is about. I want to thank Chairman Bost for introducing this important legislation and to finally bring an end to this practice. And I was proud to co-sponsor it. I'm thankful that the Trump administration has already acted to right this wrong through agency directive, and I thank you, and I yield back.
Reserve. Gentleman from Illinois yields. The gentleman from reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the representative from Colorado, Representative Boebert.
Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1041, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act. Our veterans answered the call when this nation needed them most. They fought to defend the very Constitution that guarantees every American the right to keep and bear arms. To every veteran, thank you. We see you, we honor you, and we've got your back. How do we repay our nation's heroes? Right now, bureaucratic overreach allows the VA to strip away a veteran's constitutional rights just because they ask for help managing their benefits. If you use a fiduciary, the system flags you. It is wrong, and it ends now. Chairman Bost's common sense bill stops the VA from automatically feeding veterans' names into the background check system. It protects the Second Amendment rights of the men and women who fought for ours. The radical left loves to say they support the troops until it's time to actually protect their constitutional rights. The Second Amendment is not optional, and our veterans have the right to exercise it fully. No more treating men and women who defended this country like second-class citizens. We will restore and protect the constitutional freedoms of our veterans and every American. I urge my colleagues to pass H.R. 1041, honor our warriors by restoring their rights. Thank you, Chairman Bost, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless our veterans.
Mr. Speaker, we have no more speakers, and I'm ready to close, and I reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm obviously frustrated with what I've heard here today. There's been a lot of lip service to the concept of due process from my colleagues, which is particularly interesting considering they do not share this same passion for the application of this right elsewhere at VA. If it wasn't already clear that my colleagues are only here to put on a show, I'll remind everyone that even if this bill were to be signed into law today, it would have no effect whatsoever on the processes and procedures at VA. Why, you may ask? This is because in its infinite wisdom, the Department of Justice and VA have decided to ignore Congress once again and unilaterally interpret the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act so as not to apply to VA. So VA isn't even doing the things the majority is accusing them of doing anymore. But sadly, my colleagues have decided it's worth continuing to sow mistruths, distortions, and risk endangering veterans and civilian lives alike by messaging on the backs of beneficiaries who need treatment, not weapons. Mr. Speaker, we must be steadfast in providing meaningful support to our veterans, not using them as props for political gain as this bill does. And as the chairman said, this is not about gun rights. This is not about gun rights. I would suggest that what this is about is politics. We must do anything and everything we can to protect the most vulnerable veterans in the VA system and not inject more risk of harm. So for those reasons and many more, I strongly oppose this bill, and I urge my colleagues to vote against it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Democrats claim that 1041, as amended, would harm vulnerable veterans. That's simply false. But just don't take my word for it. Organizations who represent millions of veterans and their families support this. In fact, the bill is supported by the American Legion, the Vietnam Veterans of America, the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers, Mission Roll Call, the Black Veterans Empowerment Council. All of these groups and countless others, veterans organizations across this nation, support this piece of legislation, including the Veterans of Foreign Wars, many others. Why? Because they understand that this is about the rights of the men and women who stood in the gap to make sure you can keep yours. This bill is also supported by Second Amendment groups, including Gun Owners of America, the National Rifle Association, the National Association of Gun Rights, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and importantly, H.R. 1041, as amended, is supported by the civil liberties groups and organizations who advocate for the elderly and those with disabilities, including the American Civil Liberties Union, not necessarily a conservative group, the National Disability Rights Network, the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, the Association of Mature American Citizens Action, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you would agree, and even the ranking member Takano can admit, that is not every day that many of these groups come united together, especially probably the NRA and the ACLU. Their support shows how discriminatory the practice that the VA has been doing for over the last 3 decades has been by reporting to the next unit anyone who seeks fiduciary help from the VA. Mr. Speaker, most of the people who have spoke on the Democrat side of the aisle would carry other laws that would take away your Second Amendment right. Mr. Speaker, I am not arguing the gun law here, though I would. I am arguing the rights of our veterans for due process, the same as someone who never raised their hand. Why should someone have their rights improperly and without due process taken away because they chose to stand up for this nation? I would hate to have to go back, and I'm going to tell you, this wasn't for political purpose. I've been carrying this bill for a long time. But this weekend, you're going to have to go back to your districts and you're going to have to talk about the fact, I'm there for you, my veterans. Thank you. I'm there for you. But I don't think you're worth your constitutional rights, even though you served to defend them. Mr. Speaker, this is a situation that has wrongly occurred in this nation for way too long. And I thank the administration for getting it straightened out. We're not saying that someone that is a veteran, that if they are a danger to themselves or a danger to other people, can't go through the process like everybody else and say, okay, we do need to go ahead and look over their ability to have that Second Amendment right. That's why we have the next list. But whenever the next list is overburdened, matter of fact, with our veterans at the percentage that it is, something is wrong. Something is wrong. This bill has been a long time coming. I ask unanimous consent to enter letters of support for many of those organizations that I mentioned a while ago into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My message to all the members is real clear. Support this bill. Support the constitutional rights of those people who fought for those constitutional rights for you. As I said, this has gone on long enough. I think that a person who knows and understands this issue will stand up for their veterans and support this bill. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on the engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to prohibit the Secretary of Veterans Affairs from transmitting certain information to the Department of Justice for use by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Morrison of Minnesota moves to recommit the bill H.R. 1041 to the Committee on Veterans Affairs.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is.
I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. Those favoring a vote on the yeas and nays will so rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stahl, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to H.Res. 1300, I call up the bill H.R. 1329, the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 538, H.R. 1329. A bill to permit the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum to be located within the reserve of the National Mall and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on House Administration, printed in this bill, modified by the amendment printed in Part B of House Report 119-653, is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debated for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on House Administration or their respective designees.
The Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act, introduced by my colleague, Representative Malliotakis from New York. This year, our nation marks its 250th birthday. 250 years since we declared independence. As we celebrate this milestone, I think it's all the more worthy that we pass this bill and begin construction of the museum dedicated to the history of American women. Throughout our history, women have played a pivotal role in so many of our nation's most celebrated achievements and innovations. In my home state of Wisconsin, 3 women participated in the famous 1854 meeting at the Ripon Schoolhouse where the Republican Party was born. Mr. Speaker, I was proud to support previous legislation authorizing the creation of this museum. Today's bill takes the important next step by designating an exact location on the National Mall. Additionally, it creates guardrails to ensure this museum does not represent history in a partisan way. I want to thank Representative Malliotakis for her work on this bill, her continued support to get this to the floor. She has been tenacious in a great way to get us to this spot, and so I thank her for her hard work. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The Smithsonian American Women's History Museum is long overdue, and it deserves a place on the National Mall, period. End of sentence. The National Mall is America's front yard, the place we welcome visitors from all over the world. And the Smithsonian is where we gather the stories, ideas, inventions, and memories that make us who we are. It's where we keep what matters to our large and, yes, very diverse American family. It's where our nation tells its story, and American women have shaped every chapter of that story, which is why I enthusiastically supported the bipartisan version of H.R. 1329, introduced by my Republican colleague and friend from New York, Representative Nicole Malliotakis, along with her companion bill, H.R. 1330, related to the National Museum of the American Latino. Together, those bills would resolve a statutory anomaly that has stalled both museums and allow them to move forward on the mall as Congress intended. The bipartisan legislation is a simple, straightforward fix with 231 co-sponsors in this House, including over 100 members from each side of the aisle. But for some reason, that's not the bill we're debating. I'm saddened and disappointed. The Republican majority has needlessly politicized what has for years been a bipartisan priority. The hyper-partisan museum bill we're debating right now differs from the original legislation in 4 primary and important ways. First, it omits the National Museum of the American Latino, which has been paired with the Women's History Museum since they were both authorized together in 2020. Second, for reasons that pass all understanding, it grants the President of the United States unprecedented, unilateral, unchecked authority to disregard the Smithsonian's recommended site and the Congress's recommended site for any reason or for no reason at all and pick his own. Third, it hands control over design and construction to boards stacked with political loyalists who have already shown they will rubber stamp whatever the president wants, and to see evidence of that, look no further than the pile of rubble that used to be the White House East Wing. And fourth, it inserts an ideological poison pill intended to dictate what the museum can and cannot say about women's history. Mr. Speaker, we deal with a lot of complicated issues around here that require complex solutions. This is not one of them. There is a Republican-led bipartisan bill just sitting here with 231 co-sponsors, including 104 Republican members. We could pass that bill on suspension right now. The American people will be baffled, as I am, that my Republican colleagues have chosen this route instead, especially since in 2019, Democrats accepted a Republican amendment requiring the museum to reflect, quote, the diversity of the political viewpoint held by women of the United States. Virtually identical language appears in this bill, ironically right next to the provision that explicitly excludes political viewpoints held by women of the United States. I guess it should have read, excuse me, could I have order? I guess it should have explicitly read the diversity of political viewpoints held by Republicans alone. If the goal were actually to move this museum forward, we would not be abandoning the years-long bipartisan process that has brought us to the brink of construction. We would not be considering a bill with a cynical ideological poison pill. We would not exclude the Latino Museum. We would not allow boards filled with Trump loyalists to have final say on the museum's design and construction. And we would certainly not be giving President Donald Trump, of all people, unchecked authority to pick a location for the Women's History Museum. And we would not be spending time debating a bill destined to fail. Ask yourselves, who should decide what appears in a Smithsonian museum, where it goes, what it looks like? Should it be historians, scholars, and curators who for 180 years have made the Smithsonian the premier museum complex in the world, hosting 15 million visitors per year? Is that who it should be? Or a politician who complains publicly that the Smithsonian focuses too much on, quote, how bad slavery was, and it has taken a literal wrecking ball to some of our most dignified and important landmarks in this country. A politician who uses our cultural institutions to rewrite history and hand out no-bid government contracts to his friends. That's the question before us. If House Republicans want the museum to succeed, the path ahead is straightforward and easy. Bring the clear bipartisan fix with its 231 co-sponsors to the floor. Pair it with the Latino Museum that we have done for years, and let the historians and experts do the work of telling the full and complex story of American women. This legislation does the exact opposite. It takes a bill, the narrow purpose of which is to specify a museum location, and throws even more uncertainty into the very question. It makes literally no sense. Mr. Speaker, I'll conclude where I began. The National Mall is where we welcome visitors from around the world, of all types. Everyone comes here. And the Smithsonian is where we mark what makes us who we are. They belong to the American people, and the American people deserve both the Women's History Museum and the National Museum of the American Latino on the National Mall that tells their stories without political interference. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, urge the majority to bring the bipartisan bill that 104 of the members of their conference have co-sponsored to the floor, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I remind my colleague, Mr. Speaker, that Democratic leadership had the full opportunity in the 117th Congress to bring forward this legislation. They chose not to. They used their time to do things like rename the Cannon Caucus Room after the current Speaker in the 117th Congress. It's just a reminder of the importance that this bill has on our side. It's with that I'd like to yield 5 minutes to my colleague, the gentlewoman from New York, Representative Malliotakis, to speak on the bill for as much time as she may consume.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Chairman Stile for helping us advance this bill to the floor. He knows very well the role that his state of Wisconsin played in being the first to ratify the 19th Amendment. And so we are here today because we're voting on a very simple bill. It is a bill to transfer land on the National Mall for the Smithsonian Women's History Museum, which was authorized already by Congress, overwhelmingly bipartisan in 2020, and signed by President Donald J. Trump. Now, this bill, as my colleague has mentioned, had over 230 sponsors. It's very bipartisan. And I think we all agree that it is long past time that the women of this country, who make up more than half the population, deserve to have a museum that tells their stories and shares their contributions to our great country. Women like Rosie the Riveter and the millions of women who stepped on our factory floors during World War II, the more than 10,000 code girls of Arlington Hall who secretly recruited by the U.S. Army and Navy during World War II to serve as code breakers, the 855 women of 6888, the only all-black, all-female battalion deployed overseas during World War II, the Black Angels of my district, who were courageous nurses who at the height of segregation worked and did find the cure for tuberculosis. The first female member of Congress, Jeanette Rankin, Susan B. Anthony and the suffragists, the great role that they played in our nation's history. That's who we're here to honor today. And yes, we have more than enough women to display in this museum, that we shouldn't be fighting over the need to have non-biological individuals in there. So I don't understand why we're pulling bipartisan support from legislation to establish this museum. As a matter of fact, let me read so everybody at home knows exactly what this debate is over. It is over one sentence. The museum shall be dedicated to preserving, researching, and presenting the history, achievements, and lives experienced by biological women in the United States. That's what the disagreement is about. That's what the big controversy is about. I hate to alert my friends on the other side of the aisle, but a museum dedicated to women's history should have women in it. That's it. That's simple. That was just something that through this process, regular order, going through the committee process, a member put forward an amendment. It was adopted by the majority of the members on the committee, and it added that simple provision. The idea that President Trump, by the way, because you guys are saying that the National Planning Commission is now a Trump commission. This is a commission that was established by Congress over 100 years ago. It's not a new commission. And in fact, the president only has 3 appointees to that 12-person commission. So to say that he has complete control is just simply not true. I really hope that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join us on this, because it would be sad to see that all of the Democrats would vote down this important bill. But I will say that it was a Republican senator that introduced the 19th Amendment that gave women the right to vote. It was a Republican Congress that passed the 19th Amendment to give women the right to vote. It was a majority of GOP states that gave women the right to vote when they ratified that amendment. It was a GOP president who gave us Title IX, which prohibited sex-based discrimination in the educational programs. And yes, it was President Donald Trump, a Republican, who authorized this museum in 2020. So if Republicans have to carry the water again to deliver for the people of America, the women of America, we will do so. But I really hope that this can remain a bipartisan measure, and I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Certainly appreciate my colleague and friend, Ms. Malliotakis, and her comments. But the truth is, I don't, first of all, think anyone who lives in Rochester, New York, the home of Susan B. Anthony, just to the west of Seneca Falls, needs to be told about the history of the women's suffrage movement in the United States, or the fact that Susan B. Anthony was arrested in 1872 for voting in a presidential election. We are well steeped in it, and we think this ought to be a museum who's curated by scholars and by women and those groups, and that the location of this, which was identified in a bipartisan bill, the suggestion that somehow we now are not supporting or withholding our support for a bipartisan bill is simply wrong. It's actually, that would be the simple thing to do. Put the bipartisan bill on the floor. I don't know what the objection to it is, except it doesn't have the following language. And this is really what it is all about. And I'll read from the bill. The site for the museum is hereby designated as the South Monument Site, located on the National Mall, bordered by 14th Street Southwest, Jefferson Drive Southwest, Raoul Wallenberg Place Southwest, and Independence Avenue Southwest, except that the President may designate an alternative site for the museum within 180 days of the date of the enactment of this subsection. An extraneous portion that was added, which basically takes away everything the previous sentence said. Everything the bipartisan bill was intended to do is identify this location. But for reasons, as I said earlier, that pass all understanding, we are now going to give the President of the United States complete, unilateral, unchecked power to make this decision. It makes no sense. It is not a bipartisan bill. In fact, if you want to have this resolved, you could eliminate that portion of the bill and we could just do the simple sentence, which is a bipartisan bill, which has 104 Republican sponsors of it. We could do that. We could do that right now. That bill is already in print. Ms. Malliotakis is actually the sponsor of that bill, so I would be happy to support that bill of hers. But don't suggest for a minute that this is a bipartisan bill, because it is not. It is actually the most hyper-partisan of bills, all intended to make sure that the president is happy with the location of the museum and give him the complete power over Congress to make that decision. So with that, I would like to yield time. I want to give 1 minute to my dear friend, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this amended bill. I was a proud co-sponsor of the bill as introduced, but instead of moving the bipartisan text, Republicans have hijacked this bill to give both President Trump complete and total authority over the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum's location. And he does, contrary to what Congresswoman Malliotakis has asserted, he does have loyalists who have power over the museum's design. He does have loyalists on the commission, which will determine the museum's design. The museum was supposed to be a celebration of every American woman's contribution, but of course, Republicans couldn't help themselves from adding texts that would prohibit trans women from being included in the museum. This is really a harmful provision that will undoubtedly lead many conservatives to challenge the inclusion of any woman they deem not feminine enough. I urge my colleagues to reject this bill and pass the original bipartisan bill with the National Museum of the American Latino.
Reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Representative Lee, also a member of the House Administration Committee, to speak on this bill.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the creation of a Smithsonian Museum dedicated to the history of American women. I thank Chairman Stile and Representative Malliotakis for their leadership in this important effort. Before coming to Congress, I had the privilege of serving as Florida's Secretary of State. In that role, I oversaw our state's museums, archives, and historical resources, and I gained a deep appreciation for the importance of preserving our history carefully and telling it well. Museums are not simply collections of artifacts. They are places where we remember who we are, where we came from, and the values that shaped this nation. And the story of America cannot be fully told without the story of American women. From the earliest days of our country, women have helped build families, communities, and institutions. They served in times of war, advanced science and medicine, strengthened our economy, and helped expand the promise of liberty for future generations. Today, women serve in leadership roles across every aspect of American life. But much of that progress in America is relatively recent. As someone who has spent much of my career in fields historically dominated by men, I know personally how meaningful it is when young women can see the stories of those who came before them. As an example, since the founding of our nation, roughly 12,000 Americans have served in the United States Congress, yet only about 450 of them have been women. Hearing and sharing the stories of those women will no doubt pave the path for the talented generation to come of women leaders in America. Representation matters, and so does remembrance. The stories we preserve shape what the next generation believes is possible. This museum will tell the story of countless women, teachers, entrepreneurs, scientists, soldiers, mothers, and public servants whose perseverance and courage helped shape this nation. It is disappointing that some Democrats are opposing this museum because it is dedicated to the history and achievements of biological women, when we should be coming together to honor the women who helped shape this nation. As the mother of a daughter, I think often about the examples that she sees and the stories that she learns about the women who helped shape this country. May she know us. May she and all of the other young women like her see what is possible. And may they go further than we ever dreamed. When young girls walk through the Smithsonian and see the contributions of women woven into the fabric of our national history, they will understand something important, that they too are foundational
I yield an additional minute.
to the American story. I look forward to the day when all Americans can visit a museum that honors the remarkable legacy of women in the United States. For these reasons, I support this effort. I encourage my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Wisconsin reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will say I find it rather astonishing that we feel the need here to give a lot of advice and counsel to the Smithsonian Institution about how to appropriately build and operate a museum, to curate a museum. I don't know if anybody's been, and by the way, they do museums really well. We're supposed to pass legislation, which we don't even do that well. Now we're going to tell them how to run museums. I would just encourage my friends, if you haven't, the Smithsonian runs a number of museums in town, one on American history, one on African Americans, one on American Indians, one on natural history, one on air and space. 15 million people come to them. I've never had once, in the 8 years I've been privileged to be a member of the Congress, I've never had a constituent or anybody else stop me and say, you know, I really have some advice to give to the Smithsonian Institution about how to run museums. I think they do it exceptionally well. In fact, I would argue that the Smithsonian Institution is the greatest museum complex anywhere in the world. It's an extraordinary place, free to Americans and others who come from other places to see the American experience. I don't think they need really a whole lot of help from members of the United States House of Representatives on how to run museums. Let's let them do that. Let's let academicians and scholars and historians and museum curators, let them do that. All we're supposed to do here is say where the location of the museum is to be located. That's the one issue in front of us. Talk about making complex a simple issue. People will be baffled and scratching their heads to watch this debate, should they ever watch this debate, because this is a simple matter, and we should not complicate this. Let's identify the location, and let's let the Smithsonian Institution do what they do better than any other organization in the world. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my dear friend and colleague from the great state of Washington, Ms. Randall.
Gentlewoman from Washington State is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act as amended. And frankly, that's disappointing because this bill used to be a bipartisan success story. Democrats and Republicans came together to support creating both the American Women's History Museum and the National Museum of the American Latino and the National Mall. But instead of building on that bipartisan agreement, this bill was turned into another political power grab with a last-minute partisan amendment in committee. Republicans inserted culture war language limiting the museum to biological women. That language was not added to improve the museum. It was added to erase trans women from American history. Whether my Republican colleagues want to acknowledge it or not, trans women are just as much a part of this country's history as anyone else. Museums are supposed to expand our understanding, preserve truth, and reflect the full complexity of this country. They went even a step further to corrupt this bill, handing President Trump extraordinary control over museum design and planning. Congress should not hand any president unilateral power over how American history is told, especially after we have seen this administration pressure institutions and whitewash history. This legislation also leaves behind the National Museum of the American Latino, even though Congress established both museums together under the same law. And let's be honest about why. We are watching a systematic effort by Republicans and this administration to strip out uncomfortable truths and erase marginalized communities. Pero la historia de los Latinos es la historia americana. It's not secondary. It's not optional. For all these reasons, at the appropriate time, I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with an important amendment to this bill. My amendment would have stripped out the exclusionary language targeting trans women, moved the Women's History Museum and the National Museum of the American Latino forward together, as Congress originally intended, and blocked this dangerous power grab that hands President Trump unilateral control. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the text of this amendment, and I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for the motion to recommit. I yield
Without
back.
objection. Gentleman in reserves, gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 5 minutes to the mother of Augusta, the representative from Florida, Ms. Kamek, to speak on the bill.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my colleague from the great state of Wisconsin for his leadership on this issue. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 1329, the Women's History Museum, and I want to start by recognizing my colleague, Nicole Malliotakis, for her tenacity and her leadership in bringing this legislation to the floor. Nicole, thank you for never backing down or giving up. Now, as you can see, I have my daughter, Augusta Dare, here with me today because I wanted her to be a witness to this incredible moment in our nation's history where we stood up for all of the women who have helped build this country and told their stories. That is what this museum is. It's not a political statement, it's a promise that the women who came before us will not be erased. They will not be minimized, and they will not be forgotten. We all know that women's history, or at least I thought we knew, that women's history is not a partisan issue. It's American history, full stop. Now, the women whose stories will be told in this museum, I want you to think about what they went through. It wasn't that long ago, 1974, that a woman couldn't open a credit card in her own name without her husband's signature. Before that, she couldn't serve on a jury, and before that, she couldn't vote. And yet these women, extraordinary, stubborn, gritty American women, they didn't quit. They persevered. They built something anyways. Now, if that is not an American story, I don't know what is. And quite frankly, it's that story that deserves to be told and have a place on our national mall. As chairwoman of the Republican Women's Caucus, I have had the honor of standing along some of the most incredible women who fight every single day, not for headlines, but for the next generation of girls who need them to know that hard work, courage, and grit will take you further than anyone can ever tell you you couldn't go before. We believe that these women deserve to be honored proudly, without political manipulation, which is why I am genuinely baffled that the Democratic Women's Caucus has chose to oppose this bill. Their reasoning for opposing the bill? Because we want biological women's stories to be told, wanting a museum to be dedicated to women, to celebrate women? That's the controversy, Mr. Speaker? Forgive me, but this issue should never have become partisan. It's common sense. Biological women deserve to have their stories told. And for those that say that this gives the president too much say about what is happening with this museum, that's just nonsense. Representative Malliotakis has already refuted the claim that the president will have that type of power. He cannot. What this bill does is ensure accountability over a federally funded institution that will represent American history for generations. This Smithsonian belongs to the American people, not to political activists, not to ideological agendas. I know that millions of women around the country right now are standing with us, and they will not apologize for standing up for women. Not today, and not ever. I'm here right now on the House floor with my daughter, Augusta Dare, and I can only do this because of the women who came before me. And it's those women that we strive to honor. The pioneers, the mothers, the scientists, the service members, the entrepreneurs, the educators, the ones who broke barriers before it was fashionable, and the ones who never got a thank you. They deserve this. Every little girl in America deserves this. So I urge my colleagues to reject the political noise around this bill, pass this legislation, and ensure that future generations like little Augusta's can walk through these halls, if she chooses to, and know without question what American women are made of. With that, Augusta and I, we yield back.
I reserve.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
To quote Ms. Kamek, who I have great respect for, women's history is American history, full stop. I completely agree. And I'm delighted to see her and her daughter in her maiden speech in front of the House talk about the importance of women in American history. I completely agree with that as well. What I find perplexing is that the construction of this museum has been held up now for several years since its authorization because the Congress could not reconcile the fact that we hadn't fully identified a location for the museum. That's the only thing that prevents the construction of this museum from moving forward. So we have a bipartisan solution to address just that, the exact location of where this museum should be built. But I think the question that needs to be answered in this moment is why we're not doing that bill. It has 231 co-sponsors, a majority of this House, over 100 members on both sides of the aisle. And it is simple and it is straightforward. So why aren't we doing that? Why are we here? Why do we have to debate for the balance of an hour a bill that is so simple to pass and has broad support? It's because this bill was rewritten by the White House. This bill was rewritten so that not a woman, but a man, and frankly a man with something of a questionable history toward women, that he would have the final say. And by the way, he could, if he didn't like the location that we've identified in this bill, he has a way to raise his objection. It's called veto the bill. He could veto it if he didn't like the location, and then we would negotiate. Article 1 prerogatives of the Congress is to pass laws. That's what we should be doing. But what we've done is we've managed to twist ourselves into a pretzel just to satisfy the president, so that the president can look at the location that Congress by law would like to make clear and say, yeah, I don't like that. After all, sorry, Congress, thank you for your input, but go away. I, Donald Trump, will decide unilaterally where the Women's History Museum will go. Forget about the 435 members of the House. Forget about the 100 members of the Senate. We appreciate your input, like little children. Now go away. I will make the decision. That's what's going to happen. That's what this bill is. And if that's not the case, I'd love to hear a single word of explanation about why we're not doing the bill that has broad bipartisan support, that specifically says where this museum will be located, on the National Mall, on America's front yard. Why is that not the case? Why are we here? So we can dance around it. We can talk about the contributions of women. Certainly no one on this side of the aisle would ever spend any time disputing that. We are in complete agreement, which is why we have over 100 sponsors for the bill on our side of the aisle as well. The question is, and the question that people watching will want answered is, why aren't you doing that bill? And I'll be eagerly listening for an explanation as to why the bipartisan bill with 231 co-sponsors, which specifically says where this museum should be, the exact location, why we're not doing that bill. I'll sit quietly and listen, maybe not so quietly, but I'll sit and listen. I'm looking for one word of explanation about why that's not the case. And until that time, I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield as much time as she consumes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Representative De La Cruz, to speak on the bill.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for yielding, and thank you to Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis, who worked so hard to get this piece of legislation on the floor today. I stand proudly to support H.R. 1329, the bipartisan Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act, as an original co-sponsor. Look, for 30 years, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have worked together to establish a space that carries on the legacy of the American women who fought tirelessly for our rights. It is absolutely unacceptable that any member would oppose this bill because they want a biological male, a man, to be honored in the space designed for women, biological women. Any vote that opposes this legislation undermines every woman who fought for our right to vote, our right to own a home, our right to attend college, and even our right to own our paychecks. Ultimately, I represent a community that understands the difference between a man and a woman, a community that respects women, a community that will be proud that today and always they can count on me to stand up for biological women and stand up for common sense. Common sense. Let's think about that common sense, which obviously my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not have and lost along the way. Today, I will proudly, con orgullo, I will vote yes on this bill. I will vote yes on this legislation. I will vote yes for my abuelita who is in heaven smiling down. Para mi mamá who's watching right now on C-SPAN. Con orgullo, watching her daughter speak on behalf of women here in America, to tell our story, to share our history, women's history. I will vote yes for this legislation. I will vote yes for biological women, and today I will vote yes for common sense. I yield back.
I reserve.
Gentlelady yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentlelady's comments. It's interesting she began her comments by citing the bipartisan bill, which isn't before the House, the bipartisan bill which I'm urging us to pass, the bipartisan bill which has over 100 sponsors on the Republican side of the aisle, 100 sponsors on the Democratic side of the aisle. She used that frame, even though that's not the bill before the House, and of course could not offer an explanation as to why the bill which she cited actually isn't before the House, and instead we have a hyper-partisan bill which gives Donald Trump unilateral power to decide where this museum is going. I'd also note that among the rights that she was talking about for women, the right to vote, the right, et cetera, she didn't mention the right to control their own bodies. You know why? Because we've taken that away from women. This Supreme Court and this president have taken away the right of women so that my grandchildren, my granddaughters, have fewer rights than my mother did, than their grandmother, their great-grandmother had. We didn't talk about that. If we're going to talk about the rights of women and how important it is to support women in this country. And we didn't talk about why this bill is going to end up with no museum being built, because we insist on giving unilateral power to Donald Trump to decide all things that the Congress should be deciding. But before I reserve, I do want to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady, my dear friend from California, Ms. Chu.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in strong opposition to Republicans' partisan version of my previously bipartisan bill, the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act. Today should have been a celebration of success after years of bipartisan collaboration and good faith negotiations on a bill that I was proud to be a leader on, ensuring that women receive their rightful recognition in our nation's capital. Instead, Republicans threw all of that away by unilaterally making extremist changes to our once bipartisan bill, giving President Trump the power to decide the location, the design, and even the content of this museum. This completely undermines our bill's original intent. This museum is about honoring the prolific contributions that women have made to this country. Instead, Republicans have disgraced this process and embarrassingly made it entirely about one man, Donald Trump. Women deserve better. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman reserve. Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I inquire how much time is remaining.
And has 13 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recognize and will yield as much time as she may consume to the author of the bill, the gentlewoman from New York, Representative Malliotakis.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify some points and answer some of the questions of my colleague. This is like the good old times in the New York State Assembly, Mr. Morelli, like we had fun debating there as well. Well, first of all, let me just say that this bill is actually site-specific. It does include the quadrants of the site that was selected by the Women's History Museum Advisory Council. The original version, which we've introduced, did not have those specific quadrants. It did not specify a specific site. It just allowed for a future selected site to be transferred. So in that case, there was no clarity on what the site was. So we amended the bill to add the specific quadrants of the site on the South Capitol site on the National Mall, so it would be clear that that is what was the selected site of the museum's advisory council. Yes, it does give 180 days for the president, if necessary, to alter, and that's because if for some reason there's a problem with that site, and it turns out you can't build on it, if the engineers come back and say there's a problem that it can't be built on, we don't want to have to go through this entire process and have to pass another piece of legislation. We would just all work together to select a site that would be suitable. So in terms of specificity, this bill actually gives more clarity on the location than the initial version. Now, that's the only thing that has changed. It's that provision as well as adding the sentence about ensuring that it's biological women. And that was amended in the committee process. As I said, every legislation is introduced here. We garnered 230 co-sponsors. It went to the committee. The committee went through regular order. Somebody had an amendment. The amendment passed, and therefore it was added. And that was added as a result to just ensure that there's clarity that only biological women would be represented in a women's museum. I also want to address this issue about the National Capital Planning Commission. This is not President Donald Trump's commission. This was a commission that was established over 100 years ago, in which the president only gets 3 appointees. The commission is a 12-member federal body, and this is obviously anything that is built as a capital project, right, goes through this commission. It's not like it's a new commission that was set up by this particular president. Both this commission and the Fine Arts Commission were established well over a century ago. And the 12-body makeup of this, it's 3 appointees only by the president. That is not a majority. That is not giving the president unanimous control. The mayor of Washington, D.C. gets an appointment. The chair of the D.C. Council gets an appointment. The House and Senate committee chairs with the D.C. jurisdiction, your committees get an appointment. The heads of the DOD, Interior, and GSA get an appointment. You have 2 mayoral appointees and 3. So that's the makeup of this. So 3, I know sometimes my colleagues on the other side may have a little difficulty with math. We see that during the budgeting where they want to spend more than we can afford. 3 is not the majority in a commission of 12. Okay, so please stop lying and saying that the commission is being controlled by one particular man. That is simply not the case. So I just wanted to give those clarifying points. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm very proud that it is the Republican Party that is putting forward this legislation. This was authorized, again, by President Trump in 2020. President Joe Biden had 4 years to move this ball forward and to designate the land. He did not do it. So we are here today with the same president who authorized the Women's Museum, President Donald J. Trump. And what I will say is that, you know, they claim, the other side, to be the party of women. Yet it is the Republican Party that introduced the 19th Amendment, that passed the 19th Amendment, majority Republican-led states that ratified the 19th Amendment, Title IX, so important to women in our colleges, female athletes, all educational programs. That was signed into law by a Republican president. And yes, it is a Republican president today that has authorized the Women's History Museum, and it will be a Republican majority in Congress that gets this done, because for 4 years, the other side, when they had control, they failed to do so. Now, I still hope that this will be a bipartisan vote. It really should be. There's no reason for this not to come out of this House today and to celebrate the women of America. We can all be proud of women who have contributed from our respective states to the building of this nation. And as my colleague said, there have been so many struggles over the year, whether it be the right to vote, whether it be to apply for a credit card without needing a male cosigner. Women weren't allowed to be on a jury. They weren't allowed to attend a military academy. These are stories that need to be told. And sadly, the current generation, future generations, we take maybe a lot for granted. We don't know the history on the struggles that women have endured. And so I hope that we can come out of this today with a bipartisan vote in support. Let's get this museum done, and let's do something that we can all be proud of as Americans.
I reserve, and I'm prepared to close.
The gentlelady yields, the gentleman reserves, and is prepared to close. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, might have a check of time on our side.
You have 9 minutes remaining.
9 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, we could do this bill and get this done and make clear where this museum is supposed to be. All we have to do is pass the bipartisan bill. And if we want to amend it with this exact location, if that's what Ms. Malliotakis is suggesting, I'm happy to do that. But there's so many things that she said that I need to respond to. First of all, President Biden couldn't do this because Congress has created, in the authorizing legislation, this anomaly. So we need Congress to be able to specify the location, which is the point of the bipartisan bill, which has over 230 sponsors on both sides of the aisle. We could do that. This is simple. But that's not what's here. And by the way, just to remind the gentle lady, in case she's not clear, the chairperson of the NCPC that has responsibility here, the chair of that is the current White House Staff Secretary, William Scharf. It's the president's employee who runs it. And by the way, anyone who believes that the president has much regard for the law or how these things should go should just look at the pile of rubble that is the East Wing of the White House, where the president defied tradition, common sense, and appropriateness and just knocked down one of the most historic sections of the most historic building in the world, and is building it without anyone's contributions, without any appropriate guardrails, without any appropriate oversight, because, let's face it, that's what this president does. And look, somehow, and I do want to go back. I'm sorry, I thought I read this into the record, but just to be clear, if people think this is an exact location, they should read it to the end. After we identify the site, it says that except the president may designate an alternative site for the museum within 100 days of the date of the enactment of this subsection. That's a little like when I was in high school saying to my father, can I stay out late? He'd say, yes, unless I say you can't. Does that mean I can stay out late? It only means that I can stay out late if he gives me permission. So we're going to put it at this site. We've got it specifically here. And Ms. Malliotakis is right. There's an exact location, except unless the president says that's not where he wants it. I mean, this is the Congress. Article 1, when I first came to Washington, Article 1, it must have been said 1,000 times in my first few weeks. Article 1 prerogatives, the Congress. Article 1, the first section of the Constitution. The legislative responsibilities herein lie with the Congress of the United States. And yet, what are we doing? We're passing legislation, which the president does have the right to sign or veto, in which case, if he vetoes, it comes back here for further action by the houses. So he gets one bite at the apple, but we're not content with that. We have to then give him unilateral power over what we've just passed to do whatever he wants. It's insanity. There's no explanation for why we're not doing the original bill. None. I'm still listening, still haven't heard it. But I do want, I'm sorry, I thought I had someone who was going to come and speak. Apparently they are in a committee and can't do it. So I'll continue to list for the explanation, perhaps in the close by my colleagues and friends. We will hear why finally there's something wrong with passing the original bill. And by the way, this isn't going to clear it up because this bill is not going to become law. So I'll tell you what, in a new Congress where there's a new majority, we will put the actual location, we'll put it in law, we'll send it to the president, we'll see whether or not he insists on not only a bill that has a location, but insists more on the power to unilaterally do whatever he wants, which seems to be the only way this majority is willing to do anything in this House, is to ultimately give the power, complete power, to the president to do what he chooses to do without our input. With that, I'll reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
I reserve it and prepare to
Gentleman
close.
from Wisconsin reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm prepared to close. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You want to know why I think so many Americans have given up on this institution? Think about what we're doing right now. Think about this debate. I hope people see it. We were handed something extremely rare in this building nowadays, a finished bipartisan bill sponsored by more than half the members, with over 100 members on both sides agreeing to it. And we lit it on fire. We've basically thrown it out, put it in a dumpster. And for what? To stroke the president's ego, to bully a vulnerable group of people who make up less than 1% of the population. The worst part is that we're doing it at a museum that's intended to honor women and the enormous contributions of women to this country, who succeeded despite a government that failed them at times, who overcame great obstacles. We've manufactured ours. They have every excuse to fail and made history anyway. They overcame those obstacles. We have no excuse, and yet we are on the verge of failing them once again. They deserve better then. They deserve better now. And so I'll implore my colleagues one last time, stop with the games, bring the bipartisan version of this bill to the floor, along with the Latino Museum bill, so we can finally get shovels in the ground on the National Mall for these critically important museums and honor the amazing people in this country who have written the chapter of American history that we all stand on the shoulders of and whose legacy we enjoy. So I urge defeat of this bill, bring back the bipartisan bill. We will enthusiastically build it. We'll put shovels in the ground, and we'll build these national museums as they should be. And with that, I yield back my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 1329, the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum Act, as introduced by my colleague, Representative Malliotakis from New York. As we know, this year is the nation's 250th anniversary, and we have an opportunity to place the Women's History Museum of the Smithsonian on the nation's mall. The bill designates and takes an important step by designating the exact location of where that museum would be on the mall. Provides guardrails regarding the content of the museum. I want to thank again my colleague, Representative Malliotakis, for her hard work on this issue. I encourage my colleagues to support this bill. And Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All time for debate has now expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to permit the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum to be located within the reserve of the National Mall and for other purposes.
Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of House Res. 1329 is, H.R. 1329 is postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Boss, seek recognition?
Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1300, I call up H.R. 6047, the Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson Benefit Expansion Act as amended, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 497, H.R. 6047, a bill to amend Title 38, United States Code, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to increase the dollar amounts for the payment of certain disability compensation and dependency and indemnity compensation under the laws administered by the Secretary.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Veteran Affairs, printed in the bill, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of House Report 119-653 is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debated for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Veteran Affairs or their respective designees. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Boss, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Takanya, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks to insert extenuous materials in the record on H.R. 6047 as amended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 6047 as amended, the Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson Veterans Benefit Expansion Act, introduced by my friend and fellow veteran, Representative Tom Barrett. I want to speak to you today about some of the great Americans this bill will impact. Sherry Briley is the survivor of and spouse of Chief Warrant Officer 3, Donovan Bull Briley, an Army Special Operations pilot killed in 1993 in Somalia. Most Americans would be more familiar with the movie adaptation of the harrowing day, the film Black Hawk Down. But for Sherry Briley, this was not Hollywood. This was her husband, the father of her 5-year-old daughter. Donovan gave his life in defense of freedom, the type of sacrifice we will commemorate on Memorial Day. This legislation would provide the first meaningful increase in survivor benefits for families like Briley's since 1993. Over 500,000 survivors like Sherry received dependency and indemnity compensation for VA. Our DIC is a monthly payment of $1,700 meant to help supplement lost income after a service member's death. It has only been adjusted for inflation over the last 30 years, but this bill would add an extra 1.5% to the DIC over the next 2 years. I also want to discuss Sergeant Eric Edmondson. When Eric was 25, his vehicle was destroyed by an IED on the Syrian border. His spleen ruptured, his kneecap shattered, his spine fractured, and he sustained traumatic brain injury. For 30 minutes, Eric's heart stopped beating. Eric was transported to Walter Reed Army Medical Center to recover, but his injuries left him unable to walk or speak. For the past 20 years, his parents, Edgar and Bethany, and his wife, Stephanie, have been Eric's full-time caregivers, supporting Eric as they work together to raise Eric's 2 kids. Despite these injuries, his family has empowered him to live a full life as possible. Hunting, painting, spending time with his children, and going to church. As the Edmonds family recently wrote in an op-ed for Stars and Stripes, and I quote, "2 incomes vanish. The experience multiplies. The expenses multiply. When a service-connected injury permanently removes earning capacity, the math doesn't bend for patriotism." End quote. This bill recognizes that and would provide a $10,000 increase to the 7,000 severely disabled veterans like Eric, many of whom require 24/7, around-the-clock professional medical care. Veterans like Eric receive the 3 highest tiers of disability compensation called R1, R2, and T. Many of these veterans will never work again and cannot perform basic tasks. Eric's family dedicated their lives making sure Eric, one of our nation's most wounded soldiers, continues living with dignity. Mr. Speaker, this bill is for family like the Brileys and the Edmondsons. As the families put it in their recent op-ed, the circumstances are different, but the consequences are the same. Quote, "The cost of military service does not end when the ceremony and the headlines fade. It echoes through decades, through college tuition bills, medical equipment invoices, mortgage payments, retirement plans that must be deferred or abandoned altogether." End quote. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the text of the op-ed be entered into the record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill would also expand VA home loan eligibility to members of the National Guard and Reserve who have at least 14 days of active duty service at a 1% higher rate. Today's Guard and Reserve deploy along active duty service members. They deserve a broader access to VA home ownership opportunities as well. Mr. Speaker, I also want to address the offset in this legislation because there has been a great deal of misinformation surrounding them. The fact is that House Republicans chose to follow the House rules and the law. We fully paid for the legislation so that we could get this bill done, because promises made to the veterans should be promises Congress can keep and not show votes or fake outrage to get clicks and our votes. Now, let me be clear about what this bill will do. This bill will not eliminate or harm the VA home loan program. It would also not impose a loan fee on any disabled veteran, and it would not eliminate 0% down on a VA home loan. Instead, this bill contains 2 bipartisan offsets that would extend current home loan fees and would extend the current cap on certain veterans' pensions who are in government-funded nursing care. It also increases the home loan funding fee that families would pay when refinancing by a small amount. During the 116th Congress, then Chairman Takano supported and voted in favor of a similar funding fee proposal on refinancing of VA home loans. I find the arguments against our similar proposal today insincere. It reeks of the type of politics our veterans don't deserve. Mr. Speaker, I'm a veteran. If I thought that this bill would harm veterans, you can trust I would not bring the bill to the floor. But, as the saying goes, don't take my word for it, because over 22 veteran service organizations support this legislation as written. Let me repeat, the veterans groups like the VFW, the American Legion, the Disabled American Veterans, and many others support the bill. These organizations represent millions of veterans and military families. Support this legislation because they know these families cannot afford to wait another decade for Congress to act. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that a joint letter from 20 veterans organizations supporting the bill is included in the record. Thank you. And additionally, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record a joint letter from RAO, MCRA, and NGAS in support of expanding VA home loan programs to include Guard and Reserve members with 14 days of active duty. Thank you. Veterans deserve more than speeches. They deserve results. If you support these benefit increases, when you need a serious plan, you need a serious plan to pay for them. Because simply saying, someone else will figure it out later, that's not real leadership. Speaker, this bill comes down to a simple question. When Americans send our soldiers off to war, the result sometimes is life-changing injuries, grieving spouses, full-time caregivers. Will this country stand behind them later in the years? Again, I ask my Democrat colleagues, if veteran groups support the bill, then why in the world don't you? Mr. Edgar Edmondson testified before the Veterans Affairs Committee, and he asked Congress to stop the politics and get this done. Mr. Speaker, families like the Edmondson and the Brileys deal with the reality most Americans never see. The Brileys answered the call to serve. The Edmondsons answered the call to serve. Now Congress must answer their call. This legislation, these families, and the thousands of families like them, we have your back. It is a distinct honor to advance this bill just before Memorial Day. Now, I urge all members to support H.R. 6047 as amended. And Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with a very heavy heart and in opposition to this bill. Representative Barrett and House Republicans have engineered here an impossible choice. What they have said to the American people is that only by raising costs on one set of veterans can we afford to help another. At a time when we're spending trillions on defense, trillions on tax cuts for the wealthy, and countless other frivolities like ballrooms and a slush fund for the president's friends, to suggest that we can only help veterans by hurting them is patently ridiculous. And that is why I oppose this bill. I want to clearly state that we owe our service members, veterans, and their families, and their survivors a debt of gratitude, as they have given everything to this nation. The promise we made to them is something we strive to live up to every day. However, I think this bill, and I believe this bill, misses that mark. We know that these groups desperately need more resources as our veteran population ages and requires more acute care. And as I have mentioned before, and as I am sure the majority will repeat, the catastrophically injured and survivor community has not seen an appreciable increase in their monthly rate since 2009. And I agree, it's well past due that we correct that wrong. And I certainly believe they are worth it. And in fact, I wish we were increasing these benefits even more. Unfortunately, this majority seeks to correct that wrong by inflicting harm on another community of veterans who are deserving of support who are struggling veteran homeowners. Just in case anyone needs a reminder, let's look at the last year and a half. Last spring, Secretary Doug Collins canceled the VA Service Purchasing Program, otherwise known as VASP, which assists veterans facing mortgage challenges prior to setting up their backstop program. Chairman Bost and Representative Van Orden cheered on this development as thousands of veterans suddenly faced tenuous financial circumstances and no resources to turn to as they faced foreclosure. Let me just say, in the past 12 months since the closure of VASP, since the cancellation of the VASP program, 10,000 veterans have lost their homes due to foreclosure. We could call this the Secretary Collins, Representative Van Orden, and Chairman Bost foreclosure program. And all the while, during this time of the past year, President Trump's affordability crisis has sent prices through the roof, making the dream of buying a house entirely out of reach for many Americans. So, to recap, at a time where it's already hard to buy a home, Republicans want to make it even harder. They've made it easier for veterans to lose their homes when funds are tight, and now they want to make it harder for veterans to even buy a home in the first place. Not only do they want to make it unaffordable to buy a home, they want to squeeze our veterans when they attempt to refinance. And for many, it's a last-ditch effort to save their home. And remember, they already came after VASP. They canceled the program. They cheerleaded for the Secretary to cancel the program. And so what we're seeing today is an attempt to take away affordable housing for veterans. These are people who have used a home loan. These veterans I'm talking about have used a home loan while in service to live with their families at a duty station and use it again when they move on to the next tour. Now understand, the VA home loan is not just about veterans. It's also about active duty service members. They are also eligible to use the veteran home loan to buy a home, and also the program to refinance a home. I'm talking about the transitioning service members that want to buy a place back home, folks who have done their part for this country and want to transition to civilian life. So active duty service members moving to a duty station, transitioning service members who want to buy a home back where they want to settle, and even more critical, these are veterans attempting to keep their homes amidst rapidly rising foreclosures. And now we are asking veterans to shoulder the cost of survivors and catastrophically injured veterans. Again, taking from one set of veterans in order to help another group of very, very deserving veterans. Again, I'll emphasize the impossible position we are putting our veteran community in. We are pitting one set of veterans against another, instituting a civil war in which we rack and stack which community is more deserving than the other. Frankly, it's shameful. And before my Republican colleagues who have served stand up here and tell me that they'd be happy to pay that benefit for their fellow veterans, I'd ask them one thing. Why are we asking them to? Why are we asking our veterans to shoulder this cost? Why must we put the onus on veterans and service members? Haven't they paid enough? And yes, I agree. We need to be responsible with how we spend tax dollars. But I'm curious, why is it only when we are looking at benefits for the veteran and the survivor community must we take this mindset? We certainly didn't have this debate when we were offsetting a $30 billion war of choice in Iran, which will only make more veterans. Trump's $1 billion new ballroom, or a $75 billion slush fund for ICE, which now the Senate's having trouble getting over to the House. If my counterparts in the Republican Party truly gave a damn about veterans, they would not pit them against one another just to give them a meager down payment on better benefits. Now, if they did, they would enact meaningful change. We could be instead bringing to the floor the Love Lives On Act. We would pass the Caring for Survivors Act, and we would ask the American people to pay for them. And I have no doubt the American people would say yes. We should pay for these things. We shouldn't put this on veterans. And I could go on and on all day, we can expand access to toxic exposed veterans, provide fertility care for our women veterans, address traumatic brain injury and blast injury. Getting things done on behalf of our veterans requires bold action. And that's why today I have filed a discharge petition on the Major Richard Starr Act. It is live and ready for signature, and I invite my colleagues on the other side, as soon as we're done with this debate, to go down and sign that petition. I believe it will reach 218 very quickly. Chairman Bost, Congressman Barrett, and Congressman Van Orden, I invite you right after this debate to go down and sign the petition, the discharge petition, to bring the Richard Starr Act to the floor. I ask my colleagues to join me in signing it now. All my colleagues, when they come to vote, in just maybe 45 minutes or so, sign the petition. We can get something meaningful done on behalf of veterans right now. Let's end the wounded warrior tax. If we're not committed to caring for veterans and ensuring that they and their survivors get benefits that they were told that they'd be entitled to when they signed up on the dotted line, then we need to stop making more veterans. Full stop. We can choose to do the right thing. We can choose to do the honorable thing. We can choose to do the moral thing and give survivors a meaningful benefit. But right now, my colleagues across the aisle are choosing a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches. We cannot allow ourselves to accept veterans paying for their own benefits. And we should not tolerate force in this community to fight each other in a pecking order of who matters most. And I hope to appeal to my colleagues' morality when I say that increasing compensation to survivors and catastrophically injured veterans is the right thing to do, and we should do it, but we cannot do it at the expense of other veterans. This legislation has pushed us to the point of having to make a hard decision out of what should have been an easy one. Waive PAYGO and pass meaningful legislation. But today, we sit here debating a change on the margins that opens a Pandora's box to charge veterans for their own benefits. And that is why I simply cannot support this legislation as written. And I encourage my colleagues to do the same. And I will say that was a wonderful poster of all the veteran service organizations who support this legislation. Yes, they support raising the compensation for the catastrophically disabled. But if you read their letter very carefully, they're silent on the pay for. They're silent on the subject of should you ask our service members that are serving right now in the waters around Iran whether they should be charged thousands of dollars and more fees to refinance their homes. There's not a single one of those veteran service organizations that say that they agree with that pay for. So I encourage my colleagues to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to please address their remarks to the chair. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, while I appreciate my colleagues for suddenly wanting to be fiscally responsible, I do not appreciate my colleagues implying that the home loan funding fee as an offset is unnecessary or inappropriate. Finding a way to pay for expenditures and benefits is not an option. It is a requirement. May I remind my colleagues and Ranking Member Takano that he has supported dozens of bills that contain the home loan funding fee. My colleague has also submitted a manager's amendment on the floor to increase fees for refinancing loans in the 116th Congress. And while the offer used by the ranking member only increased fees, refinancing loans by 0.5% and 0.85%, and was only temporary increase, the concept still remains the same. This legislative body has long understood that fiscal responsibility is not separated from caring for our veterans and their survivors. It is part of that responsibility. The House has repeatedly relied on adjustments to the VA home loan funding fee to pay for veterans' benefits expansions. Members on both sides of the aisle have voted for that approach many times. And as chairman of the Veterans Committee, I don't just pay lip service to the veterans and survivors we serve. I get things done for them. Now, I would appreciate it if my colleagues across the aisle would stop caring about political wins and focus on getting a win for the most deserving population of veterans and surviving spouses. So let's get the bill paid for across the finish line. And with that, I will yield as much time as he may consume to the sponsor of the bill, the representative from Michigan, Representative Barrett.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 6047, the Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson Veterans Benefits Expansion Act, legislation that I'm leading with Chairman Boss to support the service members and families who sacrifice the most for our nation. When men and women sign up to serve in our armed forces, they willingly put their own lives on the line to defend the American people and the freedoms we too often take for granted. Some of those heroes make the ultimate sacrifice. Others, who are lucky enough to come home, do so with life-changing injuries. And while we can never fully repay the debts we owe these men and women, that will never stop us from doing everything that we can. My bill will deliver a long overdue, historic increase in benefits to care for veterans who were severely injured in the line of duty. And it will support the Gold Star families who lost a spouse, a parent, a child, or a loved one in service to our country. H.R. 6047 is named in honor of two patriotic Americans. Sherry Briley persevered after her husband, Chief Warrant Officer 3, Donovan Lee Bull Briley, was tragically killed in action when his Black Hawk went down in Mogadishu. In the face of hardship, she continued raising their daughter and providing for their family after his great sacrifice. Sergeant Eric Edmondson suffered a severe brain injury when his vehicle was struck by a roadside bomb in Iraq. His injuries have left him unable to speak, walk, or work, and his family provides full-time, round-the-clock care. I've had the privilege to meet and share time with Sherry and Eric and his family and families throughout this process. Eric Edmondson and his family were here in Washington, D.C. just yesterday, meeting with members of Congress. Sherry Briley is here this week and joins us in the Capitol today. And I can honestly say we wouldn't be at this point without their strength, dedication, and hope. One thing that Sherry Briley told me as we were talking about this is that when she suffered this great tragedy, it was widows from the Vietnam and Korean War generation that stood up to help lead her through this process. And she's standing today to lead that effort on behalf of the generations of Americans that will follow behind her in hoping to lead and increase this benefit. This bill named in honor of these families to increase support for survivors like Sherry and Eric and the catastrophically disabled and Gold Star families is critically important. Some will be eligible for an additional $10,000 a year to cover their expenses through special monthly compensation for the catastrophically injured. And for the first time since 1993, more than 500,000 surviving spouses, parents, and children will receive an additional disability indemnity compensation to help cover their needs as they continue without their loved ones. In addition to that, we're expanding the VA home loan to National Guard and Reserve component men and women who sign on the dotted line to serve our country so that they can have an opportunity at the American dream and build their own home. My wife and I were fortunate to qualify for a VA home loan to buy our family home together years ago, and that's a benefit we want to extend to more families. I want to thank Chairman Bost again, and it's reminding me of an experience I had in basic training. We would line up beside our bunks before going to bed at night and recite the Soldier's Creed. And there's a line in the Soldier's Creed that said, "The brave soldiers of the past would be proud of me." I know I'm proud of the sacrifice that Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson and their families have made on behalf of this country. And I think we stand here on the eve of Memorial Day, proud of the efforts we're taking to build upon the benefits that they so desperately need. And I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on H.R. 6047. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the chairman has referred to the moments when I was chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee when we did look at pay-fors related to increasing the interest rate reduction refinance program. We did pass a bill out of the House in 2020 that would have increased the interest rate reduction refinance loan fees by 1/4%. But it did not become law, and when you strip away all the context around that bill, you can try to set up a gotcha. You did it. You did what we're trying to do, but the reality is that we're in a much different situation now. First, the proposed increase in 2020 returned to current levels just after a few years. Representative Barrett's and Chairman Bost's proposed increase replaces the current level with their new fee level. It's not a temporary change. It's a permanent increase. Today's proposed increase is almost 3 times what was contemplated back in 2020. That translates into $2,500 to $3,000 more in fees that veterans would have to pay under Representative Barrett's plan. And that cost doubles when the veteran has to pay interest on that fee increase. Also back in 2020, home loan mortgage and refinance rates were at record lows. Fees had much less of an impact on veterans' ability to lower their housing costs. Today, interest rates are so much higher. Many more veterans are facing foreclosure, and as I said, 10,000 veterans in the past 12 months. Thousands and thousands of veterans are in jeopardy of losing their homes in the coming months. And the Trump administration has gotten rid of VASP, and as I said, with the cheerleading done by the chairman and Representative Van Orden. VASP was the last-ditch program to keep veterans and their families in their homes. It has been a year, and the replacement, the partial claims program, which I supported in instituting, has still not been rolled out yet, and it won't be rolled out for several months. Meanwhile, we will see more veterans foreclosed upon. Refinancing, therefore, is currently the last line of defense in keeping veterans with distressed loans in their homes. And Representative Barrett is proposing that we raise costs at this very moment in this financial environment. And when this Congress has passed a reconciliation bill costing billions and billions of dollars that were not offset, mind you, the $70 billion that the Senate was hoping to send over to here, the Republican Senate, that this House presumably would have also approved of, the Republican majority, that $70 billion was not offset. We're also looking at potentially a $1.5 trillion defense budget increase. And there's talk about $1 billion on the president's ballroom. How do we justify taxing veterans to access their own benefits? How do you justify that? And let me just say, I offered an amendment. To pay for this bill, not with the money that would have gone to other veterans. I have an amendment that would have delayed for 3 years the implementation of a big, bad, ugly bill tax break we were giving to very wealthy people with $15 million to pass on to their heirs. We would have delayed the tax break that rich people get when they want to pass on their wealth to their heirs. we would delay that for 3 years. That would pay for the cost of this bill. That amendment was rejected. I think that very wealthy people benefit from the bravery and the courage of our military service members. And I don't think it's not too much to ask the wealthiest people in our country to bear the cost of paying for the catastrophically disabled veterans. I think the American people would countenance that much better than let's take away the ability for our service members that are currently serving in the waters of surrounding Iran, or our veterans. We shouldn't be asking them to have to pay more in home loan fees for benefits that they thought they were getting when they signed up. It's the choices that we're making that bother me here, and I don't think we should be doing something that's very, very worthy by charging one set of veterans to pay for another set. And with that, I'm going to yield 3 minutes to my good friend and ranking member of the Subcommittee for Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies on the Appropriations Subcommittee, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the great state of Florida.
Lady from Florida is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise today as the ranking member of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Subcommittee in opposition to the offset in this bill. Mr. Speaker, I was stunned to see this pay-for included in this bill and so disappointed that no one included appropriators in this discussion. But I was not surprised. The benefit expansion that this bill would make are worthy changes that we absolutely should pass. As a supplemental monthly allowance of $833.33 for severely disabled veterans requiring aid and attendance. That's an issue we haven't addressed since 1993. I wish that we could have worked on this issue last week when our appropriations bill was on the House floor, or the month before when the bill was before the Appropriations Committee. Instead, House members are going to take a vote that will rob Peter to pay Paul, and when we are talking about our veterans, that is just plain wrong. This bill triples VA home loan fees, which amounts to hundreds or thousands of dollars on each home loan, which will make homeownership even harder for veterans. When a veteran refinances their home loan, they'll get hit with this tripled fee, which will be cost prohibitive for many veterans. Republicans are increasing, tripling fees for one group of veterans to pay for benefits for another. And you know what I find the most despicable, though? It's that the veterans and their families were told that this pay-for was required or the bill would not become law. That is a flat-out lie. And I speak as an appropriator and someone who understands the pay-go rules. At some point, if you recall, my friends on the other side of the aisle, we thought it was going to be tonight, but we'll likely push that to next week or when we come back. You were going to push through a partisan spending bill that would include billions of dollars in spending that is completely unpaid for, because the pay-go rule would be waived, just like every point of order. That's what you could do in this bill, but instead you are saddling one group of veterans with tripled fees to get a home loan to pay for benefits for the other. And that's why I must rise in opposition today. This benefits expansion should be passed. It should, because I firmly believe that we must honor our commitment to our veterans at every step. But let me be very clear, the precedent that we are being asked to set is a dangerous one. We will not take from one group of veterans to give to another, no matter how small we claim the pay-for would be. Chairman Bost and Ranking Member Takano, I would ask that we all get together and meet, Chairman Carter, myself, and the two of you, to talk about how we can accomplish this in a bipartisan way. We should not waste any of the House's time, because the House and Senate is going to need to conference our Milcon VA bills, and I want to make sure that this issue is addressed in that bill. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, when this bill drops the painful triple fee increase, you will have my vote. If I can ask the gentleman for additional
as much
30
time as
seconds.
she may consume.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, when this bill drops the painful triple fee increase on VA home loans, you will have my vote. In the meantime, I must strongly urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill. This is completely unnecessary. The pay-for is not required. They could waive it just like they do on nearly every other bill, and I would ask my friends on the majority side to seriously reflect on what this precedent would mean for our veterans in the future. We should not be tripling the cost of a VA home loan to pay for benefits that are sorely needed and deserved, but it is completely unnecessary to hit one group of veterans. Coming from a party that says they're against fee and tax increases, this is pretty shocking. It's unacceptable, and it doesn't have to be this way, and you know it. I urge a no vote, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I reserve.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The lady from Florida yields. The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I find it deeply disingenuous for some of my colleagues to suggest that Republicans are willing to pay for war, but unwilling to pay for the veterans. As chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I am closely aware of the true cost of war. We see it in the disability compensation, in the survivors' benefits, in the prosthetics, in the mental health care, in the long-term care of catastrophic disabled veterans. Those costs exist because brave men and women answered the nation's call and came home carrying the physical and invisible wounds of war. The VA budget continues to grow because America continues to honor the promises made for those who serve. But with that, I would like at this time to yield 4 minutes to my good friend from Wisconsin, who knows and understands what it's like to stand in the gap for the rights of this nation, Representative Van Orten.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm currently working with the appropriators to try to allocate some money for acting lessons for my colleagues so that some of their arguments could be more believable, because they simply are not. Let me explain what the VAST program did. There was unelected bureaucrats under the Biden administration who decided to start buying loans from lending institutions. That is not a VA home loan. It is a VA home loan guarantee. So they did this without authorization. They did it contravening the will of Congress to the tune of $6 billion, projected to be $16 to $20 billion. Here's how incompetent the Veterans Administration was under the previous administration. The VA bought the loans from a lending institution, lowered the interest rate to 2.5%. The rest of the American public paid for that because the lending institution was made whole. Then the VA had to contract back with the institutions they just bought the loan from to service the loan because they didn't know how to do it. That's why that program went away. It would have tanked the entire VA home loan guarantee. We want every active duty service member veteran and future veterans to have access to that program, and the VAST program would have destroyed it. And I corrected the problem with the partial claim bill. And what it did is simply aligned VA home loan guarantee program with other federal home loan guarantees. That was it. It was an elegant solution, and it's done. And it will be implemented next month on the 15th. And yes, there were veterans that lost their homes during this period of time, and that is very, very unfortunate. It truly is. And my heart goes out to them. But we must make sure that we understand this program has to go on in perpetuity, and that's what we have done. Now let's talk about what we're actually here for today. There are profoundly handicapped veterans who need 24-hour care, and their caregivers need help, and they need to be able to live in dignity. And that's what this bill is doing, and I strongly support Mr. Baird for doing this. This should have been done years and years ago, but it simply was not. The offset for this, on average, will cost $8 a month for a second home loan or a refinance. That's less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And I am absolutely willing to pay that for my fellow veterans. 100%. $8 a month increase to refinance or use your veterans home loan guarantee benefit a second time. There is not a single member of the United States military that is off the coast of Iran that wouldn't willingly pay $8 a month to make sure that our catastrophically handicapped veterans get what they need to live in dignity, because that could be them tomorrow. So I find these arguments by my dear colleagues on the other side completely disingenuous, and they're bamboozling the American public to think that we do not support our veterans, and that's simply wrong. And this should be an apolitical, not a bipartisan argument. This should be apolitical. Every single American should support this, because less than 1% of the American citizens serve in the military now, and my fellow veterans deserve what we can provide to them so that they can live in dignity. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Wisconsin yields.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Illinois reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I do think the gentleman doth protest too much. The gentleman not only cheerleaded and encouraged Secretary Collins to end the VASP program over a year ago forthwith, he's now on the floor arguing to take away the last remaining tool that veterans who have distressed properties have to hang on to those properties, which is the ability to refinance their homes under the VA home loan program. He is advocating for the passage of a bill which will admirably address the catastrophically disabled, but cause veterans who are in distressed homes higher costs in refinancing. Let me explain further. Veterans are experiencing record foreclosures, and unfortunately it is not hard to explain exactly why. The Trump administration's assault on the VA loan assistance options. Just months into the Trump administration's second term, President Trump and Secretary Collins, at the urging of Chairman Boss and Chairman Van Orden, ended the Veteran Assistance Servicing Purchase Program, otherwise known as VASP. The VASP program was a lifeline offered to veterans by President Biden that served as the last resort option for veterans before foreclosure. The program worked. For inane, extreme ideological reasons, Chairman Boss and Chairman Van Orden urged Secretary Collins to end the VASP program. It is no surprise that foreclosures for veterans have doubled since that action. 10,000 veterans have lost their homes in the last year, and tens of thousands more are set to be foreclosed upon in this Trump economy. The majority might claim that their partial claims law, which was finally enacted last fall, is the answer. The gentleman from Wisconsin says that it's going to be implemented next month. We'll see. I hope he's right. But I believe that the law is still months away from being implemented. Based on the rollout, it's unlikely to save many of the veterans at risk due to limitations in the program and delays roll out. At the very least, they could have urged Secretary Collins to continue the VASP program until the partial claims program was ready. But no, tens of thousands, oh, oops, it's unfortunate, says my colleague from the state of Wisconsin, it's unfortunate that tens of thousands of veterans, 10,000 veterans have to lose their homes. And now it brings us to this moment. So with VASP gone and partial claims not ready for prime time, the only last true option for veterans is to refinance their loans so they can get current on their outstanding payments. This very legislation we're considering right now, puts that relief further away. Refinancing will become more expensive, which makes them no longer a viable option for many veterans. Veterans have less options than they did a year ago, and this bill will reduce those options even more. So at this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend, Representative Jahana Hayes from the great state of Connecticut. Do you want more? Yeah, please. I don't want to get cut off. As much time as she may consume.
The lady from Connecticut is recognized for as much time as she may consume.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to oppose H.R. 6047. For years, I have worked with Gold Star families to address the overdue need to increase benefits for surviving spouses of service members and veterans who have given their lives in service to the United States of America. This bill does not go far enough. The rate for dependency and indemnity compensation, or DIC, has been minimally adjusted since the Department of Veterans Affairs established the benefit in 1993. The current DIC rate is lower and more stringent and has more stringent rules than other survivor programs, federal survivor programs. H.R. 6047 falls short of modernizing this program. My bipartisan Caring for Survivors Act increases benefits and broadens eligibility in a comprehensive way to ensure families receive the financial compensation and support they deserve. First, my bill would raise DIC benefits by more than $450 per month per recipient, compared to the nominal $16 being proposed in H.R. 6047. My Caring for Survivors Act would increase DIC benefit payments by 25%. The bill that we are debating today would only have a 1% increase in the first year and cap out at 5% overall. Second, my bill also reduces the time frame a veteran must be disabled to qualify for DIC benefits from 10 years to 5 years. Together, these provisions would help surviving spouses who depend on DIC benefits to cover their basic expenses and make ends meet. Supporting our veterans and military families is an intentional choice that we have the ability to make. Updating DIC benefits for the first time in decades would be an incredible show of support for surviving family members of our veterans who died in the line of service. Generally, I wouldn't oppose legislation that I care so deeply about and have attempted to address for so many years, but as we have heard, this bill pays for that minimal 5% increase by taking money from veteran housing loans. That's a problem that also needs to be addressed. I agree that veterans should be a priority, so why are we only providing a 5% increase instead of the 25% they deserve? While I oppose H.R. 6047, I look forward to working with my colleagues to modernize DIC benefits and advance the Caring for Survivors Act to the floor and have eventual passage so that veterans and their surviving families can get the benefits that they have earned. With that, I yield back.
Lady from Connecticut
I
yields.
reserve.
Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I would like to recognize for two minutes? 2 minutes, the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. French Hill from Arkansas.
Gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Sherry Briley and Eric Edmondson Veterans Benefits Expansion Act. Central Arkansas is home to many of our brave veterans and active duty service members stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base and the Arkansas National Guard headquarters at Camp Robinson. It's also home to Sherry Briley, devoted surviving spouse of Donovan Lee Bull Briley, an Army Special Operations Black Hawk helicopter pilot, tragically lost in Operation Gothic Serpent, known to all Americans as Black Hawk Down. Sherry is our Gold Star family voice for the people of Arkansas. Central Arkansas and our nation have benefited significantly from Sherry Briley's work, which helps families of deceased service members, and this bill is partially named after her because of that leadership. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of this bill, which increases benefits for catastrophically injured veterans, their families, their survivors, raises survivor VA benefits by an extra 1.5% over 2 years, and expands VA home loan program eligibility requirements, importantly, Mr. Speaker, for the Guard and Reserves, from 90 days of active duty service to 14 days of active duty service. This bill is fiscally sensible and supported by over 20 veterans groups across this land, including the VFW and the American Legion. This bill honors our nation's promise to care for our veterans, their survivors, and their families. I urge support on both sides of the bill, both sides of the aisle, and I yield back the balance of my
Gentleman from Arkansas yields. Gentleman from Illinois reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I am ready to close. We have no more speakers, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's ready to close, but reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I've been searching my memory to recall such righteous indignation about costs when we prosecute wars. The rhetoric about the true cost of war is very different, in fact, non-existent. No one is prepared to handcuff our military at a time when they need equipment. Yet the individual consequences of war can last a lifetime. And when we must take them into account, after 250 years, we have more than enough historical data to understand the cost of these wars does not end at the last appropriation marked for battle. We already promised to care for veterans, and in this case, that means their families as well. Congress should not turn away or hide from that fact, and if we are to support the cost of starting and sustaining war, we must acknowledge the financial cost of supporting those veterans it creates when they come home. We need to stop treating our work in Congress as something out of the Hunger Games, that someone must suffer so that someone else can get what they need, that we need to force school children, small business owners, and veterans to compete for help from their government. We on our side of the aisle are not going to play that game with the benefits our veterans have earned. We should provide funding to give veterans that have gone to war for this country health care and benefits. In fact, if you want to continue increase funding for defense and military aid, I would say you should be required to consider the long-term cost of taking care of the service members that we're sending into harm's way. I personally would never ask for offsets for funding for the equipment our troops need, because it is the right thing to do. Just like taking care of veterans is also the right thing to do. I hope that our country and this Congress will not perpetuate a double standard when we discuss funding and support for our veterans, and that for our veterans and their families. America deserves better. Again, I will conclude by saying we should be taking care of the catastrophically disabled veterans in our country. It's been too long, they've gone without for too long, but we should not be asking other veterans to do that work. We, the American people, should be the ones that foot that bill, not our veterans. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields. Gentleman from Illinois is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate earlier in the debate that the interest rate reduction, refinancing loans, that was all brought up, and I appreciate my colleagues' comments on the interest rate reduction and refinancing loans. And I would also like to make it known that the ranking member is correct that he has not had legislation to increase the rates to the level that this bill is intending to do. However, during the 116th Congress, the ranking member proposed an amendment to the bill on the floor that would have increased the same refinancing fees we're discussing today. Now, although the rate may not be the same, the concept is the same. I note that the small increase reference fees is the only change that we make after the markup version of this bill, which has been done, is to cover the cost incurred by expanding the VA home loan program to Guard and Reserve, which they wanted, by the way. The ranking member is making this a bipartisan when it does not need to be. Instead of focusing on the delivery and an increase to the veterans and surviving spouses, those people who VA really is focused on taking care of. Regardless of who authored the bill, the ranking member has chosen to turn it into a political exercise. And I wonder why. But earlier in a discussion on the committee's future, the ranking member, Takano himself stated, "We want our gavel back. That's what it's about." The statement speaks for itself. This bill is not about committee gavels. This is not about partisan advantage. It is about thousands of American families who have waited long enough for the VA benefits to increase. My fellow GOP colleagues and I are fighting for them, not the gavel. There are 22 veteran service organizations that agree with this. You've heard from colleagues on this side of the aisle, 2 who are veterans. I'm a veteran. Why do we agree with it? Because we understand. We also understand the rules of the House. And with no disrespect for the ranking member and the other people that spoke, they never raised their hands. We did. We are asking to help those who need the help, and this is a way to do it today. If in the future we want to increase it and we want to work towards a larger amount, which I believe they deserve, both of the groups that are mentioned in this, the families that survive and those that have received the most heinous and most difficult wounds that they have to suffer through the rest of their lives, then we'll do that. But this is a bill before us today. And I'm going to say this, and I'll say it to the other members, the members on the other side of the aisle. If you want to go home on Memorial Day weekend and go out there and stand in a parade and tell everybody how great you are for our veterans and vote no on this, you better think about it. You better think about it. Because I'm going to tell you, the veterans and their voices here have spoken. They want this bill. So, Mr. Speaker, if they choose to vote no, they can answer to those veterans. I'm going to stand for them. I'm going to stand for them because I'm a grandson of a veteran, a nephew, a son of a veteran, a nephew of a veteran who had to have a lot of these services that we deal with in the VA, a son who still serves, a grandson that's going to have to receive some of these benefits, and another grandson who's serving at this time, and I don't know what his career is going to be in the fields, but it's possible that he could have to have those support too. Is it personal to me? You bet it is. This is an important bill. It is important to the families that receive these benefits. And Mr. Speaker, I encourage all of my colleagues to vote for it. I encourage all of my colleagues to vote against the motion to recommit. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois yields. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1300, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend Title 38, United States Code, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to increase the dollar amounts for the payment of certain disability compensation and dependency and indemnity compensation under the laws administered by the Secretary.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
Okay. I ask for the recorded vote, sir.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
The yeas and nays, please.
Oh, for what purpose does the gentleman from California say
I ask
that?
for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. If a sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, messages from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed S. 1473, an act to amend the Export Control Reform Act of 2018 to establish a whistleblower incentive program and provide protections to whistleblowers, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.